Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There are places in this galaxy that do not appear on any star chart. Places that no navigator has ever plotted a course toward, that no imperial cartographer has ever marked on parchment, and that no ship of the line has ever reached by accident or design. There are places so deeply hidden, so thoroughly concealed from every prying eye and every searching sensor, that even the rumor of their existence is considered dangerous knowledge. And among all these forgotten corners and sealed vaults and buried chambers, scattered across a million worlds and the spaces between them, there is one place that stands apart from all the rest. One place that is spoken of in whispers so faint that you would need to press your ear to the very lips of the speaker to catch even a fragment of what they are saying. One place that represents the single greatest concentration of forbidden knowledge anywhere in existence. They call it the Black Library. And if you settle in, if you let the quiet wash over you and allow your breathing to slow and your mind to wander down paths that most would never dare to walk, then perhaps tonight we can explore this place together. Not physically, of course. No one listening to this has the means to reach the Black Library, and if you somehow did, the things that guard its entrances would almost certainly destroy you long before you caught so much as a glimpse of its halls. But in the telling of its story, in the weaving of the threads of history and legend and whispered half-truth that surround it, we can come close. We can stand at the threshold and peer into the darkness beyond. And perhaps we can begin to understand why this single hidden place matters so very much to so many beings across this vast and terrible galaxy. The Black Library is not a building. It is not a room full of shelves somewhere in the basement of an administratum complex. It is not a data repository buried beneath miles of ferrocrete on some forgotten imperial world. The Black Library is something far stranger, far older, and far more dangerous than any of those things. It is, in essence, an entire craft world, a vessel of living wraithbone that drifts through a dimension that most humans cannot perceive, let alone navigate. A construct the size of a city, perhaps larger, that moves through tunnels and corridors and branching pathways that were ancient before humanity first looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond them. And within that vessel, contained behind barriers of psychic energy so potent that they can turn away the will of gods, there exists a collection of knowledge so vast and so dangerous that its loss could doom entire civilizations, and its misuse could unravel the fabric of reality itself. This is a story about secrets, about the price that must be paid to keep them, about the beings who have dedicated their entire existence to ensuring that certain truths remain locked away from those who would abuse them, and about the handful of individuals, human and otherwise, who have dared to seek those truths despite knowing full well the terrible cost of such knowledge. So let the lights dim, let the noise of the world outside fade to nothing, and let us begin with the road that leads to the most secret place in all of existence. Because to understand the Black Library, you first have to understand the space it occupies. You have to understand the hidden dimension that contains it, the ancient network of tunnels and corridors that connects it to the wider galaxy, and the beings who built that network in an age so distant that the very stars have changed their positions since those first pathways were carved into the skin of reality. You have to understand the webway. And the webway is a story that begins long, long before there were humans to tell it. Picture, if you will, a galaxy in its infancy. Not the galaxy you know, not the galaxy of space marines and hive cities and the grinding machinery of the Imperium. This is a galaxy from over 60 million years ago, and a galaxy ruled by beings so ancient and so powerful that even the memory of their names has been worn smooth by the passage of time. These were the old ones, and they were the first truly intelligent species to claim dominion over the stars. They were slow and patient, and possessed of a cold-blooded wisdom that allowed them to see the universe not in terms of years or centuries, but in terms of geological ages. They studied the stars with the kind of patience that only an effectively immortal species can bring to bear, and over the course of millions of years, they raised astronomy and cosmology to something that would look, to modernize, indistinguishable from sorcery. The Old Ones were not merely observers of the cosmos, they were shapers of it. They seeded worlds with life. They encouraged the development of new species on planets they deemed suitable, and they created technologies so advanced that even in the 41st millennium, 10,000 years after the rise of the Imperium, nothing that humanity has produced can come close to matching them. And among all their incredible creations, among the terraformed worlds and the engineered species and the psychic constructs that defied the laws of physics as we understand them, the greatest of all their works was the webway. The webway was the Old Ones' answer to the problem of distance. The galaxy is vast, unimaginably, crushingly, impossibly vast. Even traveling at the speed of light, it would take 100,000 years to cross from one side to the other, and light speed is far beyond anything that conventional propulsion can achieve. And the distances between stars are so great that a species without faster-than-light travel is effectively imprisoned on whatever world it happens to call home. The Old Ones refused to be imprisoned. They understood the nature of the immaterium, the roiling dimension of psychic energy that exists alongside the material universe, and they realized that this dimension could be used. Not navigated directly, for the warp is treacherous and fickle, and filled with things that hunger for the souls of the living, but partitioned, sectioned off, tamed. What the Old Ones created was essentially a tunnel system running through the space between dimensions. Not quite in the material universe, not quite in the warp, but existing in the narrow space between the two, where they carved corridors and passageways through this in-between space, using technologies that even the most brilliant mechanicus magos of the current era cannot begin to comprehend. These corridors were shielded from the dangers of the warp by psychic barriers of extraordinary sophistication, barriers that kept out the predatory entities that lurked in the deeper layers of the immaterium. And through these corridors, the Old Ones could travel, not just quickly, not just efficiently, but instantaneously. A single step through a webway portal could carry you across the entire galaxy in the time it took to draw a breath. This was the webway in its original form, a galaxy-spanning network of protected tunnels that allowed the Old Ones to go anywhere, to reach any world, to project their power and their influence to every corner of the cosmos. Yeah, it was the foundation of their empire, the thing that made their dominion over the stars not just possible, but easy. And when the Old Ones went to war, when they faced the terrible threat of the Necrontyre and the star gods they had awakened to serve them, the webway proved to be their greatest strategic asset. The Necrontyre could not match the speed at which the Old Ones could move their forces. They could not predict where the Old Ones would strike next. They could not defend against an enemy that could appear anywhere, at any time, through portals that opened and closed in the blink of an eye. But even the Old Ones could not endure forever. The war in heaven, that apocalyptic conflict between the Old Ones and the newly transformed Necrons backed by the terrible power of the star gods known as the Catan, eventually consumed them. The details of their fall are shrouded in the mists of time, lost to the millennia that have passed since those cataclysmic events. What we know is that the Catan eventually found a way to breach the webway itself. A particular star god known as the Burning One showed the Necrons how to create what became known as dolmen gates, crude and violent breaches in the walls of the webway that allowed the deathless legions to pour into the Old Ones' most vital infrastructure. The sanctity of the tunnel system was violated, and with it, the Old Ones' greatest advantage was turned against them. The Old Ones fell. Their empire was shattered, their species scattered and eventually driven to extinction, or forced to flee the galaxy entirely. But their greatest creation endured. The webway survived, damaged and diminished, and its outermost branches broken, and many of its corridors collapsed or breached by the energies of the warp. But the core of the network remained intact, a labyrinth of glowing tunnels stretching across the galaxy, waiting for someone to inherit it. That someone was the Eldari. The Eldari, the species known to the Imperium by the older name of Eldar, were among the many races that the Old Ones had created during the war in heaven. They had been designed as warriors, their powerful psychic abilities intended to serve as weapons against the Satan, whose very nature made them vulnerable to the energies of the warp. When the Old Ones vanished, the Eldari found themselves the inheritors of a galaxy suddenly emptied of its masters. And among the many things they inherited was knowledge of the webway. Over the course of millions of years, the Eldari didn't merely use the webway, they expanded it, they refined it, they deepened the tunnels and extended the network and built upon the foundations that the Old Ones had laid until the webway became something even greater than what it had been in its original form. They linked their worlds together through the labyrinthine passages. They established great cities within the webway itself, and they became the undisputed masters of this hidden dimension. To the Eldari, the webway was not just a means of transportation. It was the circulatory system of their civilization, the thing that bound their empire together across the unimaginable distances of space. And it was within this vast and ancient network, in a location so deeply hidden that even most Eldari could not find it without a guide, but that the Black Library was eventually established. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can talk about the Black Library itself, we need to understand why it was created. And to understand that, we need to understand the greatest catastrophe in the history of the Eldari species. We need to talk about the fall. The fall of the Eldari is one of those events that reverberates through every corner of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Its consequences shape the galaxy as we know it, and its echoes can still be felt 10,000 years after it occurred. It is a story of a species that had everything and lost it all, not to an external enemy, not to some conquering force that came from beyond the stars, but to themselves. The Eldari destroyed their own civilization through the simple, terrible mechanism of excess. As at the height of their power, the Eldari Empire was the dominant force in the galaxy. They had no real rivals. The Old Ones were gone. The Necrons had retreated into their tomb worlds to sleep away the eons, and the younger species that would one day rise to challenge the Eldari's supremacy, humanity chief among them, were still in their infancy. The Eldari had conquered every challenge, solved every problem, and achieved every goal that a species could conceivably set for itself. They were effectively immortal, their lifespan stretching across millennia. They were psychically gifted to a degree that no other species could match. Their technology was so advanced that it made the achievements of every other civilization look like the fumbling efforts of children playing with sticks and stones. And so, what with nothing left to conquer, and no external threat to focus their attention, the Eldari turned inward. They began to explore the full range of their emotional and sensory experiences, pushing the boundaries of sensation further and further in search of new thrills and new experiences. At first, this was relatively harmless. Art and music and literature flourished. New forms of expression were developed that would have been incomprehensible to less sophisticated minds. The Eldari reveled in the richness of their inner lives, in the depth and intensity of feeling that their psychic natures made possible. But over the course of millennia, this exploration of sensation began to darken. The search for new experiences became an obsession. Simple pleasures gave way to more extreme ones. Art became perversion. Music became the soundtrack to acts of cruelty and debauchery that defied description. The Eldari began to pursue sensations that were forbidden for good reason, crossing lines that should never have been approached, let alone stepped over. Pleasure cults sprang up across the empire, organizations dedicated to the exploration of the most extreme forms of sensation, and membership in these cults became a mark of sophistication and status. Throughout this long slide into depravity, there were voices raised in warning. The Harlequins, those enigmatic followers of the laughing god, performed their ancient mythic dances for audiences throughout the empire, trying to remind their people of the values they were abandoning and the dangers of the path they were walking. But their warnings went unheeded. The audiences were often hostile, seeing the Harlequins as relics of a less enlightened age, peddlers of superstitious nonsense that had no place in a civilization as advanced as theirs. Not everyone was deaf to the warnings, however. Some Aeldari, those with the foresight or the wisdom to see where the Empire was heading, chose to leave. The Exodites were among the first to go, departing for the farthest edges of the galaxy where they established simple agrarian lives on worlds far from the corrupting influence of the pleasure cults. Others remained longer, but eventually gathered aboard vast vessels of living wraithbone called craft worlds, preparing to flee when the disaster they foresaw finally arrived. And it did arrive. The collective psychic corruption of trillions of Eldari, feeding the warp with their depraved emotions over the course of thousands of years, eventually reached a critical mass. A new consciousness was forming in the depths of the Imperium, nurtured by the darkest desires and the most perverse pleasures of an entire species. It was growing, and it was hungry. When Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, the being that the Eldari would come to know as She Who Thirsts, was finally born, the event was not a subtle awakening. It was a psychic detonation of such catastrophic magnitude that it tore a permanent hole in the fabric of reality. The heart of the Eldari Empire, the core worlds where the concentration of corruption was greatest, was simply erased from existence. In its place, a vast wound in the skin of the universe opened, a permanent interface between real space and the warp that would come to be known as the Eye of Terror. The death toll was beyond comprehension. Trillions of Eldari died in an instant, their souls ripped from their bodies and consumed by the newborn god that their own depravity had created. Even those who had fled, the Exodites on their distant worlds and the craft world Eldari on their vast vessels, felt the psychic shockwave of Slaanesh's birth. Many of them died as well, overwhelmed by the force of the event despite the distance and the protections they had put in place. The Eldari were reduced from the masters of the galaxy to a scattered, traumatized remnant, a dying species haunted by the knowledge that the god they had created would hunt them for the rest of eternity, that every Eldari soul was now claimed by Slaanesh, destined to be consumed upon death unless extraordinary measures were taken to prevent it. In the aftermath of the fall, as almost everything that the Eldari had built was lost. Their homeworlds were gone, swallowed by the Eye of Terror. Their great works of art, their libraries, their repositories of accumulated wisdom stretching back millions of years, all destroyed or corrupted beyond recovery. The ancient worlds of the Eldari became what are now called the Crone Worlds, nightmare places within the Eye of Terror that serve as the domains of demon princes and the tombs of the greatest Eldari artifacts. The surviving craft worlds, those great vessels that had carried the most far-sighted Eldari away from the dying empire, became the primary repositories of Eldari knowledge. Each craft world had preserved what it could, saving fragments of their species' vast accumulated wisdom from the conflagration. But the craft worlds had scattered in the wake of the fall, drifting apart across the galaxy as they fled the aftershocks of Slaanesh's birth. Over the millennia that followed, as the craft worlds continued to drift further from one another, the knowledge they carried became fragmented. Different craft worlds preserved different pieces of the puzzle, and as some craft worlds were lost, destroyed by enemies, or consumed by misfortune, the knowledge they carried was lost with them. This fragmentation of knowledge was particularly devastating when it came to the Eldari's understanding of chaos. The Eldari had been studying the warp and its inhabitants for millions of years. They understood the nature of the chaos gods and their servants in ways that no other species could match. They had developed techniques for combating demonic influence, for warding against corruption, for navigating the dangers of the Imperium with a sophistication that made the crude methods of human psychers look laughable by comparison. This knowledge was the Eldari's most important asset in their ongoing war against the forces that had destroyed their empire. And it was being lost, piece by piece, craft world by craft world, generation by generation. This was the crisis that gave birth to the Black Library. Because in the midst of all this loss and fragmentation and slow erosion of everything the Aeldari had once known, there existed one place where the knowledge had been preserved intact. One place where the Aeldari's understanding of chaos remained whole and undiminished and untouched by the corruption that had consumed their homeworlds. One place that had been established precisely because someone had foreseen the need for it, had understood that a day would come when the accumulated wisdom of the Aeldari race would be in danger of being lost forever, and had taken steps to prevent that from happening. That someone was a god, a trickster, a being whose nature is deception and whose weapon is laughter, and whose plans operate on timescales that make the schemes of mortal beings look like the passing fancies of children. His name is Kegorak. He is the laughing god, and the Black Library is his creation. The story of Segorak is, in many ways, the story of survival through cleverness rather than strength. In the ancient mythology of the Aeldari, their gods were as varied and complex as the species that had given them birth through the sheer force of their collective psychic belief. There was Asurion, the Phoenix King, lord of the Aeldari pantheon. There was Cain, the bloody-handed god, deity of war and destruction. There was Isha, the goddess of fertility and the harvest, whose tears were said to nurture the very soil of the worlds where the Aeldari made their homes. And there were many others, each embodying a different aspect of the Aeldari psyche, each reflecting some facet of the incredible richness of Aeldari emotional and intellectual life. Segorak occupied a unique position among these gods. He was the god of creativity, of artistry, of deception and trickery, and the kind of humor that cuts as deeply as any blade. He was known by many titles: the Great Harlequin, the Great Fool, the First Fool. He was the trickster of the Aeldari pantheon, the one who played pranks on gods and mortals alike, who punished the sin of pride with jokes that left their targets humiliated and humbled. He was mocking and sinister, and vindictive and enigmatic all at once, a being whose true intentions were never fully clear even to his fellow gods. And it was this very nature, this fundamental commitment to mockery and detachment, and the refusal to take anything entirely seriously, that saved him when Slaanesh was born. When the fall came, when the psychic shockwave of Slaanesh's birth tore through the warp and began consuming the Aeldari gods one by one, Segorak was not among the victims. While Asurion fell, while the other deities of the Aeldari pantheon were consumed or shattered by the overwhelming power of the newborn chaos god, Segorak survived. The legends say that his mocking nature had kept him distant from the collective corruption that had given rise to Slaanesh. He had never been fully invested in the grand emotional dramas that consumed the other gods. He had always stood apart, observing with a sardonic eye, commenting with a cutting tongue. And when the catastrophe arrived, this detachment proved to be his salvation. According to the myth, as Slaanesh battled Kaine in the warp, consuming or shattering every Aeldari deity it could reach, Segorak concealed himself behind the war god. He hid in Kaine's shadow while the two titans clashed, waiting for his moment. And when Cain was finally broken, yet his essence scattered across the galaxy in the form of the avatars that now rest at the hearts of the Aeldari craft worlds, Segorak fled. He ran, not in shame, but with the calculated speed of a being who understood that survival was the first prerequisite for revenge. He plunged into the webway, into the deepest and most hidden corners of that labyrinthine dimension, where even Slaanesh could not find him. And there, in the hidden places of the webway, Segorak began to build. The exact origins of the Black Library are shrouded in uncertainty. The stories that exist within the library's own shelves name multiple possible creators, including the old ones themselves, the ancient Aeldari from before the fall, and the Aeldari gods. Segorak is the being most closely associated with the library, and most accounts credit him as its creator. But the purposes for which the Laughing God would build such a repository can only be guessed at. What we do know is that the Black Library was established as a place where all of the Aeldari's knowledge of chaos could be gathered together and preserved. Not just the knowledge that had survived the fall, but all knowledge of chaos, from whatever source it might come. This is a crucial point, and one that many people miss when they first hear about the Black Library. The library is not exclusively a repository of Aeldari knowledge. It is a repository of all knowledge of chaos. Any intelligence, any insight, any understanding of the ruinous powers that has been gained by any intelligent species in the galaxy has been sought out by the library's guardians and added to its collection. This includes Imperial knowledge, gained through humanity's long and terrible interactions with the forces of chaos. This includes knowledge from alien species that have encountered the warp and its inhabitants. And this even includes knowledge created by the servants of chaos themselves, books and scrolls and records that were written by those who had already fallen to corruption, captured and sealed away within the library's walls where they could be studied by those with the strength and wisdom to resist their influence. The result is a collection of knowledge that is, simply put, unmatched anywhere else in the galaxy. The Black Library contains more information about the nature of chaos, about the workings of the warp, about the history and methods and weaknesses of the ruinous powers than any other single source in existence. And it is this very completeness, this comprehensive nature of the collection, that makes the library both incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous. The library functions as two things simultaneously. First, it is a source of knowledge for those who fight chaos. The information contained within its walls can provide crucial advantages in the eternal struggle against the ruinous powers, insights into the nature of demonic entities, methods for warding against corruption, strategies for combating the servants of the dark gods. For those who are allowed access to this knowledge, the library is an invaluable resource, the single greatest weapon in the war against chaos. But second, and equally importantly, the library functions as a vault, a prison for dangerous knowledge, a place where information that could cause untold damage if it fell into the wrong hands is locked away behind barriers that only the most powerful and the most disciplined minds can penetrate. The library contains grimoires of demonic summoning, records of chaos cults throughout the galaxy, volumes of malignant power that could corrupt entire worlds if they were ever released. By keeping this knowledge sealed away, the library ensures that it cannot be used by those who would wield it for destructive purposes. This dual nature, simultaneously weapon and shield, resource and prison, is what makes the Black Library so important. And it is what makes the question of who is allowed to enter the library and under what conditions a matter of literally cosmic significance. Because the wrong person with access to the Black Library's contents could do damage on a scale that defies imagination. And there are beings in this galaxy who would do anything, absolutely anything, to gain that access. But let us step back for a moment and linger on Tegorak himself. Because the Laughing God is not merely the creator of the Black Library, he is its animating spirit, the consciousness that shapes its purpose and directs its guardians and infuses every corridor and every sealed chamber with the peculiar energy of a trickster god who refuses to play by anyone else's rules. Segorach is, in many ways, the most successful of the surviving Aeldari gods. While Cain exists only as scattered fragments, awakened occasionally in moments of dire need to inhabit the avatar constructs that rest at the hearts of craftworlds. While Isha languishes as a prisoner of Nurgle, the god of plague and decay, trapped in his pestilent garden and forced to serve as a test subject for his latest diseases. Segorach, alone among the surviving gods of the Aeldari, remains free and active, pursuing his own inscrutable agenda from the hidden places of the webway. And what an agenda it is! Segorach's plans operate on timescales that defy mortal comprehension. He thinks in terms of millennia, in terms of the slow turning of cosmic cycles and the gradual unfolding of events that were set in motion before the fall and that may not reach their conclusion until the very end of the universe itself. He manipulates events through his servants, the Harlequins, in sending them to intervene in conflicts and crises across the galaxy in ways that seem random or inexplicable to outside observers, but that all serve some greater purpose known only to the laughing god himself. It is said that Segorach is the only being in existence who knows every single path through the webway, every tunnel, every corridor, every branching passage and hidden doorway and sealed gate. This knowledge is what gives his followers, the Harlequins, their uncanny ability to appear and disappear at will, to strike from unexpected quarters and vanish before their enemies can respond. The Harlequins walk the webway without fear, navigating its treacherous passages with a confidence that borders on the supernatural. As many Eldari from other factions have credited the servants of the Laughing God with powers that go beyond mere knowledge of the webway's roots, suggesting that Segorach grants his followers abilities that transcend the normal limits of Eldari capability. There are even those who claim that Segorach walks among his children from time to time, disguising himself as an anonymous Harlequin player, joining their troops and participating in their performances without revealing his true identity. Whether this is true, or simply one of the many legends that surround the most enigmatic of the surviving Eldari gods, is impossible to say. But it speaks to something fundamental about Segorach's nature. He is not a distant deity, issuing commands from some unreachable realm. He is present, active, and deeply involved in the affairs of those who serve him. And the Black Library is the centerpiece of his grand design. Think about what it means that a god created this place. Not a mortal being, not a committee of farseers or a council of craftworld leaders, but a deity, a being of the warp, a consciousness born from the collective psychic belief of the Eldari species, a creature whose very existence is woven into the fabric of the Imperium. When Segorach built the Black Library, he built it with the kind of understanding that only a god can bring to bear. He understood the nature of chaos, not as an academic subject, not as a collection of facts to be studied and catalogued, but as a fundamental force of the universe, something woven into the very nature of reality. And he built the library to contain knowledge of that force, had to store it safely and to make it available to those who needed it while keeping it from those who would misuse it. The library itself reflects this divine craftsmanship. It is described as a labyrinth within a labyrinth, a structure that shifts and changes in the same way that the webway itself shifts and changes. Just as every visit to the webway feels like visiting somewhere new, so too does the library reconfigure itself, rearranging its corridors and chambers in patterns that follow the logic of a trickster god rather than the logic of conventional architecture. You could walk its halls for years and never visit the same room twice. You could search for a specific volume and find the library leading you through unexpected chambers and along unfamiliar corridors, past collections you never knew existed, and before finally depositing you before the shelf you were seeking, or perhaps before a completely different shelf containing something you didn't know you needed, but that turned out to be exactly what was required. The library's mind, for it does possess a kind of collective consciousness embodied in its infinity circuit, defends itself. It bars the weak and the corruptible. It tests those who seek entry, probing their minds for any trace of the taint that would make them dangerous to the knowledge they seek. This is not a passive process, not a simple lock and key arrangement. The library actively judges those who approach it, assessing not just their strength of will, but their fundamental character, their deepest motivations, the hidden corners of their psyche where corruption might lurk undetected, even by the person themselves. And only those who have mastered the chaos within themselves, who have confronted the darkness in their own nature and emerged victorious, are permitted to enter. This is a standard that very few beings in the galaxy can meet. Even among the Eldari, a species that has been fighting chaos for millions of years, and that possesses the most sophisticated understanding of the warp of any living species. The number of individuals who can claim to have truly conquered their inner darkness is vanishingly small. And that brings us to the guardians of the Black Library, the beings who have been entrusted with the responsibility of protecting the most dangerous repository of knowledge in the galaxy, and who have carried out that duty with an unflinching dedication that has endured for 10,000 years and more. One of the most visible of the Black Library's protectors are the Harlequins themselves. These extraordinary beings serve as the warriors and emissaries of Kegarak, traveling between the different Aeldari factions and the wider galaxy, performing their mythic dances and prosecuting their gods' eternal war against the forces of chaos. But among their many duties, the protection of the Black Library stands paramount. The Harlequins know where the library is. They know how to reach it through the webway. They know its defenses and its secrets, and they will fight to the death without hesitation or mercy to prevent any unauthorized being from reaching its gates. The Harlequins are not simply warriors, though they are among the deadliest fighters in the galaxy. They are a hybrid of artist and soldier, and seeing no distinction between the grace of performance and the brutality of combat. Their movements on the battlefield have the fluid precision of choreographed dance. Their weapons are as elegant as they are lethal, and their mastery of the webway allows them to appear and disappear in ways that confound even the most experienced military commanders. To face the Harlequins in battle is to confront an enemy that fights by rules you do not understand, that strikes from directions you cannot predict, and that vanishes before you can mount an effective response. But the Harlequins are only the most visible layer of the library's defenses. Beyond them, standing guard at the entrances to the library itself, are beings known as the Guardian Scribes. These mysterious figures are said to be among the most terrible perils in the entire webway. Little is known about them outside the inner circles of the Aeldari, but the very fact that they are described in such terms by a species that routinely faces the horrors of chaos and the depredations of every hostile force in the galaxy suggests that the Guardian Scribes are something truly extraordinary. They are the final barrier between the outside universe and the library's contents, the last defense that must be overcome by anyone seeking unauthorized entry. Within the library itself, the records are maintained by a group known as the White Seers. These are Aeldari psychers of extraordinary power and discipline who have dedicated their lives to the task of collating and transcribing the knowledge contained within the library's collection. It is a task that has been carried out continuously since the fall of the Aeldari, in a 10,000-year-long labor of preservation and organization that has ensured that the library's contents remain accessible and useful despite the passage of millennia and the gradual degradation of some of the older volumes.
Now, I want to take a quick second to just step back and give you my honest take on all of this. Out of everything in 40k lore, and I mean everything, the warp is the piece that hooked me. It is not just some sci-fi hell dimension. It is the reason every single faction in this universe is as desperate and as brutal as they are. Every bad decision the Imperium has ever made traces back to the warps in some way. Every tragedy, every betrayal, every moment where you sit there reading the lore thinking, why would they do that? The answer is almost always the warp. Pulling strings that nobody can see, and what I find genuinely unsettling about it, what keeps me thinking about it long after I close the book or shut off the screen, is that the Chaos Gods are not really alien. They are us. They are built from emotions that every single one of us carries around every day. Rage, fear, ambition, desire. That is what makes the warp scarier than any Tyranid Hive fleet or Necron dynasty to me personally. You can point a gun at a monster, you cannot point a gun at your own nature. But anyway, that's just my take. Let's go back to the video.
The White Seers are not simply librarians in the conventional sense. Their work involves not just the physical preservation of texts, but the psychic interpretation of materials that cannot be understood through conventional reading. Some of the library's contents are written in languages that no living being speaks. Others are encoded in psychic frequencies that require a skilled psyker to decode. Still others are not texts at all in the traditional sense, but psychic constructs memories preserved in crystalline matrices, or even fragments of warp energy that have been stabilized and stored in specialized containment vessels. The White Seers must be able to work with all of these formats, preserving and interpreting materials that span millions of years of accumulated knowledge from species across the galaxy. And governing all of this, setting the policies that determine who is allowed entry and what knowledge may be shared and how the library's resources should be directed, is the Black Council. This body is composed of the wisest Eldari Farseers drawn from all of the craft worlds, and it represents the closest thing the fractious Eldari species has come to an advisory body that looks after the interests of the entire race. The Black Council does not govern the craft worlds. It does not command armies. And it does not make binding decisions about the day-to-day affairs of Eldari life. What it does is manage the Black Library, and in doing so, it shapes the Eldari's understanding of chaos and the strategies they employ to combat it. Only two groups are known to come and go from the Black Library at will. The first is the Harlequin Solitaires, the most dangerous of all Harlequin performers, beings who occupy a unique and terrifying position within Eldari culture. The Solitaires are those who play the role of Slanesh in the Harlequin's most sacred and most rarely performed dance, the Dance Without End. To take on this role is to accept a terrible curse, for the Solitaire's soul is said to already belong to she who thirsts. They walk alone, shunned even by their fellow Harlequins, for their very presence is considered an ill omen. Yet they possess power and insight that others do not, and they move through the Black Library's defenses as freely as the wind moves through an open window. The second group is even more mysterious. They are known as the Illuminati, and they are humans. Not ordinary humans, but humans who have undergone an experience so terrible and so transformative that it has fundamentally changed their nature. The Illuminati are those who have been possessed by a demon and then exorcised, who have faced the full horror of chaos from within and emerged from the experience with their minds and souls intact. This ordeal has given them a resistance to corruption that is almost unique among humans, and it is this resistance that allows them to pass through the Black Library's defenses, where almost no other human could. Here, the existence of the Illuminati raises fascinating questions about the relationship between the Black Library and the Imperium of Man. Here is a group of humans who have been granted access to the single greatest repository of knowledge about chaos in the galaxy, knowledge that the Imperium's own Inquisition would quite literally kill to possess. The implications of this relationship, and the secrets that the Illuminati may have carried back to the human realm, are the subject of much speculation and very little concrete information. Now, let us step through those guarded gates. Let us walk, at least in our imagination, through the corridors of the Black Library itself, and see what treasures and terrors lie within. The first thing you must understand about the interior of the Black Library is that it defies conventional description. It is not a building with rooms and corridors arranged in a logical, navigable pattern. It is a space that exists partially in the material realm and partially in the psychic dimension, a place where the normal rules of geometry and physics do not always apply. Corridors twist in directions that seem impossible. Rooms are larger on the inside than they should be, based on the space they appear to occupy from the outside. The light that illuminates the library's chambers does not come from any identifiable source, but seems to emanate from the very walls and ceiling, a soft, silver-tinged luminescence that makes everything look slightly unreal, slightly dreamlike. The primary collection consists of tomes, books, codices, and scrolls that describe the Eldari's studies of the warp. These collected works cover all aspects of chaos with a thoroughness that is almost obsessive in its completeness. The blandishments of the chaos gods, the subtle ways in which they tempt and seduce their victims, the influences they exert upon the material universe, the invisible tendrils of corruption that reach out from the immaterium to touch the minds and souls of the living, the forms that chaos takes, the various types of demons and their hierarchies and their capabilities and their weaknesses, the creatures that serve the ruinous powers, from the lowliest demonic familiar to the mightiest bloodthirster or lord of change, the perils of dealing with chaos, the ways in which even well-intentioned interactions with the warp can lead to corruption and damnation, the promises that chaos makes, on the seductive lies that it whispers to those who are desperate or ambitious or simply curious enough to listen, and the horrors that await those who succumb, the terrible fates that befall those who give themselves over to the service of the dark gods. Within psychically locked rooms, sealed behind barriers of psychic energy that can only be opened by those with the proper authorization and the proper level of psychic attunement, there are even more dangerous materials. Countless black tomes of demon summoning, books that contain the rituals and incantations necessary to call forth the servants of the chaos gods from the depths of the Imperium. Grimoires of sorcerous power, volumes that detail the methods by which the energies of the warp can be channeled and directed for various purposes. Records of chaos cults throughout the galaxy, a detailed accounts of their activities, their methods of recruitment, their organizational structures, and the specific forms of corruption they practice. Thousands upon thousands of dark and secret volumes of malignant power, each one a potential weapon that could cause untold damage if it were ever to leave the library's walls. But the library contains more than just Aeldari knowledge. Among its most prized possessions are works that originated with other species, books and records that were captured or acquired by the library's agents and added to the collection. The Book of Magnus, the potent tome of sorcery created by the Primarch of the Thousand Suns traitor Legion before the Horus heresy, has a copy within these halls. This is a volume of extraordinary power, a distillation of the psychic knowledge of one of the most powerful psychers ever to walk the galaxy, and the fact that the library possesses a copy of it speaks to the thoroughness and the ambition of its collectors. The Book of Lorgar is also said to reside within the library, the scripture written by the Primarch of the Wordbearers, who was the first of the Emperor's sons to fall to the worship of the Chaos Gods. This book sought to spread the teachings of the ruinous powers, to provide a theological framework for the worship of chaos, and its presence in the Black Library means that the Aeldari possess one of the foundational texts of chaos worship, a document that has shaped the beliefs and practices of countless human traitors and heretics over the millennia. Beyond these famous volumes, the library also contains knowledge of mysteries that have nothing to do with chaos, at least not directly. It is said that the fate of Ara, the fallen Phoenix Lord, whose betrayal is one of the great tragedies of Eldari history, is recorded somewhere within the library's vast archives. Information about the ancient star gods, the Citan, those terrible beings of pure physical matter who nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy during the War in Heaven, is also said to be preserved here. And there are undoubtedly other secrets, other mysteries, other pieces of knowledge so obscure or so dangerous that they have never been mentioned in any source available to outsiders. There is one text in particular, however, that deserves special attention, because at the very heart of the Black Library, in a silver-lit vault that lies at the center of this shifting, labyrinthine structure, there stands a plinth made of finely graven obstinate, and upon that plinth rests a book unlike any other in the library's collection. It is a crystalline tome, its pages made not of paper or vellum, but of some transparent material that seems to glow with an inner light. It is said to contain the words of Kegarak himself, written by the laughing god in inks of light and shadow. Since the fall of the Aeldari, for 10,000 years, this tome's covers have remained closed, sealed shut by flickering chains of light that no hand and no force has been able to break. Until now. But that is a story for later. There are other tales to tell first. Are tales of those who have sought to enter the Black Library and the terrible prices that have been paid by those who attempted to claim its secrets. And of all those tales, none is more remarkable than the story of a human, an Imperial Inquisitor whose name would become legendary among both the servants of the emperor and the Aeldari, who reluctantly came to respect him. A man who did what almost no other human in history has done. He walked into the Black Library, and he walked out again, carrying with him one of the most dangerous artifacts in the galaxy. His name was Bronislaw Chevak. The story of Inquisitor Chevak is one of those rare narratives in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, where the grimdark setting gives way, just briefly, to something that feels almost like an adventure story. Not a light-hearted one, certainly, as the darkness is always present, always pressing in at the edges. But Chevak's tale has a quality of daring and audacity that sets it apart from the grinding hopelessness that characterizes so much of life in the 41st millennium. Chevak was a member of the Ordo Xenos, the branch of the Inquisition dedicated to studying and combating the alien threats that face humanity. He was, by all accounts, a man of extraordinary intellect and insatiable curiosity, someone who had dedicated his long life to understanding the Aeldari and their civilization. By the standards of the Imperium, this was already a dangerous pursuit. The study of alien species is tolerated within the Inquisition, but it is viewed with deep suspicion by many. The line between studying an alien culture and being corrupted by it is considered perilously thin. And more than one Ordo Xenos Inquisitor has been declared a heretic and a traitor for crossing that line. Chevak crossed many lines in the course of his career. He maintained contacts among the Aeldari that would have gotten a lesser man executed. He spent time as a guest on craft worlds, an honor that is almost never extended to humans. He attended performances by visiting Harlequin troops, watching their sacred dances with the eyes of a scholar who understood, at least partially, the mythic significance of what he was witnessing. He learned more about the Aeldari language, their customs, their history, and their culture than perhaps any other human in history. And in doing so, he earned something that is incredibly difficult for a human to earn from the Aeldari. He earned their respect. By the late 41st millennium, Chevak was a frail man of approximately 400 years, his body sustained by a cryogenic suspension suit that kept his failing organs functioning. He was, by this point, one of the most controversial figures in the Inquisition, a man whose radical methods and alien associations had made him as many enemies within the imperial hierarchy as the aliens he studied. But he was also one of the most knowledgeable humans alive when it came to the Aeldari, and that knowledge had made him valuable enough to protect, at least for the time being. The event that changed everything came when Chevak was investigating the crash site of a craft world on the world of Darkturus. He was excavating a shrine dedicated to Kane, the Aeldari god of war, studying the soul transference technology that the Aeldari used in the hope that it might somehow be applied to the god emperor himself. This was a radical idea, even by Chevak's standards, and it had attracted the attention of multiple factions within the Imperium, not all of them friendly. It was during this excavation that the Harlequins appeared. They emerged from a webway gate that no one had detected, their arrival so sudden and so violent that several of the Imperial personnel present were killed before anyone could react. But the Harlequins had not come to fight, or rather, not only to fight. They had come to extend an invitation. Because Chevak was known to the Aeldari, his years of study, his respectful approach to their culture, his genuine desire to understand rather than exploit, had made him unusual among humans. And the Black Council, the governing body of the Black Library, had determined that this unusual human was worthy of an even more unusual honor. They offered Chevak entry to the Black Library. The invitation came with conditions, of course. Chevak would be allowed to study the library's contents, to examine the accumulated lore concerning humanity's interaction with chaos, but he would likely never be allowed to return. The Black Library's location was too important a secret to risk, and the knowledge that Chevak would gain during his stay was too dangerous to allow back into the wider galaxy without careful control. The invitation was, in essence, a one-way ticket. Chevak accepted, without hesitation, without extended deliberation, without any of the agonizing that a lesser mind might have indulged in. He was being offered the chance to access the single greatest repository of knowledge in the galaxy, to study materials that no other human had ever seen, to learn secrets that had been hidden since before humanity first walked upright. For a mind like Chevak's, there was no choice to make. The answer was yes. It had always been yes. Before he left, his interrogator Clute, the man who had served as his assistant and protégé, injected him with a cocktail of vaccines and medical preparations, including a meme virus that would enhance Chevak's already formidable memory and intellectual capabilities. It was a desperate last-minute attempt to ensure that whatever Chevak learned in the Black Library would be preserved with perfect fidelity. And then Chevak stepped through the webway gate and into the hidden dimension. And the gate closed behind him. What happened during Chevak's time in the Black Library is not fully known. What we do know is that several standard years passed before he returned to real space and the Imperium. And when he did return, two things were immediately obvious. The first was that he looked dramatically younger. The psychic emanations of the webway are known to have a regenerative effect on human tissue, and Chevak had benefited enormously from this phenomenon. The frail, aging inquisitor who had entered the library had been replaced by a man who appeared decades younger, no longer dependent on his cryogenic suspension suit to keep his body functioning. The second thing that was obvious was that Chevak was carrying something that the Aeldari had never intended for him to take. It was called the Atlas Infernal. The Atlas Infernal is an artifact of incalculable significance. It is constructed like a book, its covers made of a burnished golden metal of extraordinary durability, so tough that the covers once deflected a bolt round fired at close range with no visible damage. The spine of the book houses an intricate and ancient mechanism that sighs rhythmically as though the book itself is breathing. But it is the contents that make the Atlas truly remarkable. Instead of paper, its pages are thin, crystalline wafers, across which are stretched thin layers of a specialized material. And upon these pages, constantly shifting and updating in real time, is a map of the webway. Not a static map, not a historical record of routes that may or may not still exist. The Atlas Infernal is a living map, one that tracks the current state of the webway in real time, showing the positions of gates and portals, the condition of various tunnels and passages, the locations of dangers and obstacles and beings that move through the labyrinthine dimension. With the Atlas in hand, its possessor can navigate the webway at will, traveling anywhere in the galaxy through the hidden tunnels of the labyrinth dimension. And critically, the Atlas Infernal contains a route to the Black Library itself. This is why Chevak's theft of the Atlas set off a chain of events that would span decades and involve some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The Harlequins, understandably furious that a human had stolen one of the most sensitive artifacts in their possession, sent agents to apprehend Chevak and recover the Atlas. The Inquisition, or at least certain factions within it, wanted Chevak brought in, either to debrief him on what he had learned or to eliminate him as a security risk. And then there was the third party in this deadly chase, the being who wanted the Atlas more desperately than anyone else, whose millennia-long quest for the Black Library's knowledge had finally been given a potential shortcut. Ahriman, the arch-sorcerer of the Thousand Suns. The most persistent and the most dangerous would-be invader the Black Library has ever faced. And it is to Ahriman's story that we turn next. Of all the beings in the galaxy who have sought to penetrate the defenses of the Black Library and claim its knowledge for themselves, none has pursued this goal with more single-minded determination, more ruthless dedication, or more devastating consequences than Arzek Ahriman, Chief Librarian of the Thousand Suns Traitor Legion and the most powerful mortal sorcerer in the galaxy. Ahriman's obsession with the Black Library is not a recent phenomenon. It spans nearly 10,000 years, stretching back to the aftermath of the Horus Heresy and the catastrophic event that defines Ahriman's existence, the casting of the rubric that bears his name. To understand why Ahriman has spent millennia trying to reach the Black Library, you have to understand the tragedy that drives him. You have to understand what the rubric did, and why Ahriman believes that the knowledge contained within the library is the key to undoing it. Ahriman was born on Terra, on ancient Earth, among the wealthy tribes of the Achaemenid Empire, a people whose kings had allied with the Emperor of Mankind during the Unification Wars. And he and his twin brother Ormuzd were among those selected for induction into the ranks of the Space Marine Legions, specifically the 15th Legion, the Thousand Sons. This was a legion of scholars and mystics, warriors whose combat prowess was matched by their intellectual curiosity and their extraordinary psychic abilities. Under the leadership of their primarch, Magnus the Red, the Thousand Sons had become the most psychically gifted of all the Space Marine Legions, their sorcerers capable of feats that astounded and terrified in equal measure. But the Thousand Sons were also cursed. Their psychic abilities came at a terrible cost, a phenomenon known as the flesh change. The very powers that made them extraordinary also made them unstable. Without warning, a Thousand Sons legionnaire could be seized by horrific mutations, his body warping and twisting and reshaping itself in response to the psychic energies that flowed through him. The flesh change was a death sentence for those it claimed, and it hung over the entire legion like a sword suspended by a thread. Magnus the Red had seemingly found a way to halt the flesh change through methods that he kept largely secret. But the cure proved to be temporary, or perhaps it was never truly a cure at all. After the Thousand Sons were driven from their homeworld of Prospero by the Space Wolves, after they had been cast into the Eye of Terror and forced into the service of the chaos god Tzeentch, the flesh change returned with a vengeance. Ahriman's own brother, Ormuzd, had been among those claimed by it long before, yet his death, from severe mutations, serving as the traumatic catalyst that would drive Ahriman's lifelong search for a cure. And so, Ahriman, desperate to save his brothers from the horrific fate of the flesh change, gathered a cabal of the Legion's most powerful sorcerers and attempted the impossible. He cast a spell of such extraordinary ambition and complexity that it would reshape the very nature of the Thousand Sons Legion. It was called the Rubric of Ahriman, and its effects were both miraculous and catastrophic. The rubric did halt the flesh change. That much of Ahriman's intention was fulfilled, but the price was monstrous. Every Thousand Sons legionnaire who lacked significant psychic ability was reduced to dust. Their physical bodies crumbled away, and their spirits were sealed within their power armor, all transforming them into the Rubric Marines, hollow suits of armor animated by the ghostly remnants of the warriors who had once worn them. These Rubric Marines were effectively automatons, capable of following simple commands and fighting in battle, but devoid of independent thought, personality, or anything that could be called consciousness. They were the living dead, in the most literal sense, ghosts trapped in metal shells, their humanity stripped away as completely as if it had never existed. For the sorcerers of the Legion, those with significant psychic abilities, the rubric had the opposite effect. Their powers were greatly amplified, their connection to the warp deepened and strengthened, but they were left surrounded by the hollow shells of their former brothers, by ranks of silent, mindless automatons who had once been warriors and scholars and friends. Magnus the Red was furious when he learned what Ahriman had done. So great was his wrath that the Primarch threatened to destroy Ahriman utterly. But Tzeentch himself, the chaos god of sorcery and change, is said to have intervened, staying Magnus's hand. Instead of death, Ahriman was exiled from the planet of the sorcerers, the Thousand Sons' new home within the Eye of Terror, and condemned to wander the galaxy in what was meant to be a hopeless quest to understand the very god who had orchestrated his downfall. But Ahriman refused to accept hopelessness. He refused to accept that the rubric could not be reversed, that his brothers could not be restored, and in his search for the knowledge that might make this reversal possible, his attention turned inexorably toward the Black Library. Think about what the Black Library represents to Ahriman. Here is a being whose defining characteristic is the pursuit of knowledge, whose entire existence has been shaped by the belief that understanding is power, and that any problem can be solved if you know enough. And here is a repository that contains the most comprehensive collection of knowledge about the warp and its workings that has ever been assembled. If there is any knowledge in the galaxy, that could teach Ahriman how to reverse the rubric, how to restore his brothers to wholeness, how to undo the terrible damage he has caused. It is almost certainly contained within the Black Library, and so Ahriman has spent nearly 10,000 years trying to get in. His methods have varied over the millennia, and he has searched for hidden entrances to the webway, has fought his way through Harlequin defenders, has employed cunning and deception and raw sorcerous power in equal measure. He has assembled warbands of followers, raided ancient libraries and repositories across the galaxy in search of clues that might lead him to the library, and pursued anyone and anything that might possess knowledge of the webway's hidden routes. The most notable of his attempts occurred in 998 of the 41st millennium, just before Abaddon, the Despoiler, launched the 13th Black Crusade. Ahriman gathered his warband of 1,000 sons and led them directly into the webway in a determined assault on the Black Library itself. The fighting was savage beyond description. Ahriman and his sorcerers clashed with the Harlequins in the narrow corridors of the webway, and their psychic powers unleashed in devastating volleys of warp energy that tore through the labyrinthine tunnels. The forces of the Ieldari craft worlds of Ulthwe and Lugganath mobilized to reinforce the Harlequin defenders, adding their own military might to the struggle. Ahriman advanced to within sight of the library itself. He came closer than any unauthorized being had come in millennia, close enough to see the vast structure looming in the distance, the culmination of his 10,000-year quest finally within reach. But the defense held. Several major arteries of the webway were, in the words of the chronicles, choked with the dead before the heretic Astartes were finally driven back from the secret paths leading to the library. The breach that Ahriman's assault had created in the webway's defenses was sealed, but at a terrible cost. An entire section of the webway was lost forever to the Eldari, the tunnels too badly damaged by the fighting to be repaired. Yet Ahriman was not entirely defeated. In the years that followed, through methods that remain unclear, he managed to steal an undetermined amount of lore from the Black Library. Among the treasures he acquired was the Tome Labyrinthus, a map that revealed a large number of secret doors, passages, and gates within the webway. This stolen knowledge gave Ahriman and the 1,000 Sons a significant advantage in their subsequent campaigns, allowing them to use the webway as a means of rapid deployment and surprise attack. During the siege of the Fenris system, Ahriman used this knowledge to guide 1,000 Sons' forces through the webway, enabling them to emerge from hidden portals on the surface of Fenris itself and take the Space Wolves by surprise. The knowledge that Ahriman stole from or near the Black Library had far-reaching consequences. It contributed directly to some of the most devastating chaos assaults in recent galactic history, including the events surrounding the opening of the Great Rift that would split the galaxy in two. Every piece of knowledge that Ahriman extracted from the library's vicinity became a weapon in his hands, a tool for advancing his own agenda and causing havoc among the enemies of chaos. And yet, for all his power and all his persistence, Ahriman has never achieved his ultimate goal. The Black Library itself has never been breached. Its innermost sanctums have never been violated. The deepest secrets contained within its walls remain beyond Ahriman's reach, guarded by defenses that even the most powerful mortal sorcerer in the galaxy has been unable to overcome. One cannot help but wonder whether this is by design, whether Segarak, the laughing god whose nature is deception and whose weapon is misdirection, has been playing a game with Ahriman all along, allowing the sorcerer to come tantalizingly close before snatching the prize away, permitting small victories that keep Ahriman fixated on his quest, ensuring that the most dangerous sorcerer in the galaxy remains focused on the Black Library rather than turning his formidable abilities toward other targets. Whether Ahriman is a genuine threat to the library or merely a piece on Segarak's game board is a question that may never be answered. But given the laughing god's nature, one suspects that the truth involves far more layers of deception than anyone, perhaps even Ahriman himself, has yet realized. But Ahriman is not the only being who has dreamed of using the webway and its secrets for his own grand designs. There is another, a figure far more powerful and far more significant in the grand scheme of galactic history, who also sought to claim the webway for his own purposes. And his attempt to do so would have consequences that echo through every corner of the galaxy to this very day. We need to talk about the Emperor of Mankind. The Emperor's relationship with the webway is one of the most tragic and consequential stories in all of Warhammer 40,000. Because the Master of Mankind did not merely know about the webway, he did not simply study it from afar, as the scholars of the Mechanicus might study some curious alien technology. The Emperor attempted to claim the webway for humanity, to build a new entrance into the ancient Eldari network, and to use it to transform the Imperium from a civilization dependent on the dangerous and unreliable method of warp travel into something far more stable and far more powerful. This was the Webway Project, the Emperor's greatest and most secret undertaking, and its failure is one of the pivotal events of the Horus Heresy. Its story intersects with the story of the Black Library in ways that illuminate just how important the webway and the knowledge it contains truly is. To understand the Webway Project, you have to understand the problem the Emperor was trying to solve. In the 41st millennium, and indeed for the entire history of humanity's expansion into the galaxy, faster than light travel has been achieved through one method: warp travel. This involves physically entering the Imperium, the roiling dimension of psychic energy that underlies and overlaps with the material universe, and using it as a shortcut to cross the vast distances between stars. Warp travel works, after a fashion, but it is enormously dangerous. Ships traveling through the warp are subject to the predations of demonic entities, to unpredictable temporal distortions that can cause a ship to arrive at its destination centuries before or after it departed, and to the ever-present risk of Geller field failure, which would expose the ship and its crew to the raw horrors of the Imperium. Moreover, warp travel requires navigators, as a specialized breed of mutant humans who possess the ability to perceive the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that the Emperor projects from the Golden Throne on Terra to guide ships through the warp. The navigators are organized into powerful noble houses that wield enormous political and economic influence within the Imperium, and they guard their monopoly on interstellar travel with fierce determination. Any technology that threatened to make them obsolete would face their implacable opposition. The Emperor understood all of this. He understood that warp travel was a crutch, a necessary evil that left humanity dependent on a hostile dimension and on a mutant aristocracy that prioritized its own power over the good of the species. And he knew that the webway offered a solution. If humanity could access the webway, and if they could travel through its protected corridors instead of risking the open warp, it would revolutionize interstellar travel. It would make the Imperium safer, more efficient, more connected. It would eliminate the need for navigators, for astropaths, for the entire infrastructure of warp-based communication and transportation that the Imperium had been forced to rely on. So the Emperor built a doorway, deep beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, in a vast underground complex known as the Imperial Dungeon. The Emperor constructed the Golden Throne. This was not the life support mechanism that it would later become. In its original conception, the Golden Throne was a device of extraordinary sophistication, designed to allow a psyker of sufficient power to create and maintain a portal into the webway. Through this portal is the Emperor's armies of Mechanicus tech priests and laborers could pass into the labyrinth dimension and begin constructing a new section of the webway, a human-built extension that would link Terra to the larger Eldari network. The project was conducted in absolute secrecy. Not even the Primarchs, the Emperor's superhuman sons who led the armies of the Great Crusade, were told the true reason why their father had returned to Terra and secluded himself in the depths of the Imperial Palace. This secrecy bred resentment, particularly among those Primarchs who felt abandoned by their father at a critical moment in the Great Crusade. The Emperor's unwillingness to explain his absence would contribute directly to the cascade of suspicion and betrayal that would eventually lead to the Horus heresy. The work progressed. Hundreds of red-robed Mechanicus technicians and conscripted laborers passed through the portal and into the webway, constructing new tunnels and corridors under the direction of a specialized caste of tech priests known as the Unifiers. But there was a critical vulnerability in the human-built section of the webway. Unlike the original tunnels created by the old ones, which were constructed of materials that naturally generated psychic shielding, the new human-built corridors were made of conventional materials. Their protection from the dangers of the warp came entirely from the Emperor himself, who had to continuously project his psychic energy through the Golden Throne to maintain the shields that kept the demons at bay. This arrangement was meant to be temporary, as the plan was for a psyker of sufficient power to eventually take over the task of maintaining the shields, freeing the Emperor to attend to the duties of governing the Imperium. There is strong evidence to suggest that Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns and the most powerful psyker among the Emperor's sons, was the one originally intended for this role. The Golden Throne required an extremely powerful psyker to operate, and Magnus's abilities were uniquely suited to the task. But Magnus, with the best of intentions and the worst of outcomes, destroyed everything. When Horus, the War Master and greatest of the Emperor's sons, was corrupted by chaos and began his rebellion against the Imperium, Magnus saw it happening. Using his formidable psychic abilities, and he perceived the truth of Horus's betrayal and the cosmic conspiracy behind it. Desperate to warn his father, Magnus used a forbidden sorcerous ritual to project a psychic message directly to the Emperor, breaching the multiple layers of psychic shielding that the Emperor had carefully erected around the Imperial Palace and the webway portal. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Magnus's psychic sending tore through the Emperor's wards like a blade through silk, creating multiple ruptures in the fabric of reality within the human-built section of the webway. These ruptures, which became known as Magnus's Folly, opened doorways from the warp directly into the webway tunnels. And through those doorways, the demons came. Thousands of Mechanicus workers were slaughtered in the first moments of the breach. The creatures of the warp poured into the human-built tunnels, a tide of howling, shrieking entities that killed everything in their path. The Custodian Guard, the Emperor's personal bodyguard, and the finest warriors in the Imperium were deployed alongside the Sisters of Silence, the anti-psychic warriors whose very presence weakened the power of the warp. Together, they fought a desperate holding action to prevent the demons from reaching the portal and breaking through into the Imperial Palace itself, into the very heart of terror. What followed was the war within the webway, a conflict that lasted for years and that consumed 90% of the Custodian Guard before it was over. The fighting was savage beyond description, as wave after wave of demons hurled themselves against the Imperial defenders in the cramped corridors and ruined chambers of the breached webway. The Emperor himself was forced to remain on the Golden Throne for much of the conflict, using his psychic might to hold the portal closed and prevent the demonic incursion from becoming completely uncontrollable. There were moments of extraordinary heroism during the war within the webway. The Custodians and Sisters of Silence fought with a determination that went beyond mere duty, holding positions that should have been untenable, mounting counterattacks against forces that vastly outnumbered them, and refusing to yield ground even when the situation appeared hopeless. But the tide could not be turned. The damage Magnus had done was too great, the breaches too numerous, the enemy too vast. Eventually, the Imperial forces were pushed back to the very threshold of the portal leading to Terra. At this desperate moment, the Emperor enacted what was called the Unspoken Sanction. 1,000 captured psykers were sacrificed to power the Golden Throne temporarily without the Emperor's presence. Freed from his prison for a single day, the Emperor himself plunged into the webway, blazing with golden psychic fire that he channeled into the very structure of the tunnels around him. He fought through the demonic hordes, reaping a terrible toll, summoning the burning avatars of loyal Imperial dead to fight alongside him. But even the Emperor's power was not enough to reclaim what had been lost. The human-built section of the webway was irretrievably compromised. In the end, the Emperor was forced to seal the portal. The webway project was abandoned, its promise of a better future for humanity reduced to ashes, and the Golden Throne, originally designed as a doorway to the stars, became instead a prison. The Emperor would remain upon it for the next 10,000 years and counting. His psychic energy devoted not to humanity's advancement, but to the simple, desperate task of keeping the sealed portal closed and preventing the demons from breaking through to Terra. The connection to the Black Library is this. The Emperor's Webway project was, in essence, an attempt to do from the outside what the Eldari had been doing from the inside for millions of years. The Eldari had inherited the Webway from the Old Ones, had expanded and refined it, had built the Black Library within its deepest reaches. The Emperor sought to create a human access point to this same network, to link humanity's infrastructure to the ancient alien tunnels that connected the galaxy. Had the Emperor succeeded, humanity would have had access to the Webway, and with access to the Webway, the possibility of eventually reaching the Black Library, of accessing the knowledge contained within its walls, would have become real. The Emperor's Webway project represented not just a revolution in transportation, but a potential bridge between human civilization and the accumulated wisdom of the Eldari, a wisdom that had been carefully hoarded and zealously guarded for millennia. When Magnus destroyed the project, he did not merely doom the Emperor to an eternity on the Golden Throne, yet he closed the door on one of the most promising paths to the knowledge that the Black Library contains. He ensured that humanity would remain dependent on warp travel, that the Imperium would continue to be vulnerable to the depredations of chaos, in ways that access to the Webway might have prevented, and that the secrets of the Black Library would remain beyond human reach for the foreseeable future. The irony of this is almost too cruel to contemplate. Magnus, the Primarch most devoted to the pursuit of knowledge, the leader of a legion defined by its love of learning, destroyed the project that might have eventually given humanity access to the greatest library in the galaxy. And his son Ahriman, the most brilliant sorcerer of the Thousand Suns, has spent the 10,000 years since trying to reach that same library through the very webway that his Primarch helped to doom. The threads of fate in the Warhammer 40,000 universe have a way of tying themselves into knots of this kind, where the pursuit of knowledge leads to its destruction and the desire for salvation becomes the instrument of damnation. When the Eldari learned that the Emperor was building a doorway into the webway, their reaction was immediate and hostile. They began sealing the portals on their own craft worlds that connected to the webway, cutting off potential routes of Imperial invasion. The Eldari had spent millions of years building and maintaining the webway, and they had no intention of sharing it with a species they considered primitive, short-lived, and dangerously psychically unstable. Now, the idea of humans stumbling through the webway's corridors, potentially breaching sealed sections, potentially leading demons into the network through their crude and unshielded tunnels, was anathema to them. And the idea of humans reaching the Black Library, that was unthinkable. The library's contents were the Eldari's most precious possession, the accumulated knowledge of millions of years of studying the most dangerous force in the universe. To allow that knowledge to fall into the hands of a species that had existed for a mere fraction of the time that the Eldari had been studying chaos, a species that demonstrably could not even protect its own webway portal from demonic incursion. That would be reckless beyond measure. The Emperor's failure, from the Eldari's perspective, was not a tragedy. It was a vindication. As it proved what they had always believed, that the younger species were not ready for the secrets of the webway, and that the Black Library must remain hidden and protected at all costs. And now, let us return to the heart of the Black Library itself, to that silver-lit vault at its center, where the crystalline tome rests upon its plinth of finely carved obstinate. Because what we have not yet discussed is the most important secret that the library contains, the secret that may determine the fate of the Eldari species, and perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. The Crystal Tome of Segorach. Since the fall of the Eldari, since the birth of Slaanesh 10,000 years ago, this book has rested at the very heart of the Black Library. Its covers have remained sealed, closed shut by flickering chains of light that no hand, no force, and no power has been able to break. Within these sealed pages, according to the traditions of the Harlequins, are words written by Segorach himself. But what those words say, what knowledge they contain, what secrets they reveal, has been unknown for 10 millennia. The chains of light that sealed the Crystal Tome were not arbitrary. They were linked to prophecy, to the unfolding of specific events that had been foreseen by the Laughing God. As each prophesied event came to pass, one chain would fade and disappear, bringing the book one step closer to opening. The events that were linked to the chains read like a catalogue of the most significant occurrences in recent galactic history. A fallen sorcerer sought the lore of the library. This was Ahriman, whose assault on the Black Library in 998 of the 41st millennium brought him within sight of the library itself before he was driven back. A king stirred in his court of death and silence, and rose once more to lead mankind. This was the resurrection of Robut Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, who was revived from his millennia-long stasis on the shrine of Macreg, and took up the mantle of Imperial Regent. The champion of the ruinous powers, prepared to seize a realm long denied. This was Abaddon the Despoiler, whose 13th Black Crusade threatened to overwhelm the defenses of Cadia and open a path from the Eye of Terror to Terror itself. As these events unfolded, one by one the chains of light faded and disappeared, and shortly before the opening of the Great Rift, yet the cataclysmic event that would split the galaxy in two and usher in a new and darker age, the last chain flickered and died. The Crystal Tome fell open. What the shadow seers of the Harlequins found within its pages was both extraordinary and infuriatingly cryptic. The tome contained a script, a narrative, written in inks of light and shadow. It described a final act, a climactic performance in the grand cosmic drama that Segorach had been orchestrating since the fall. And this final act changed utterly the story of the Eldari's destruction. You see, among the Eldari, there exists a prophecy called the Rana Dandra, the end of all days. It is the Eldari's own apocalyptic myth, a prophecy of the final battle between the forces of the Eldari and the forces of chaos, a battle that is destined to end in mutual annihilation. The Rana Dandra is written about in the sacred Eldari text, known as the Asuriata, which predicts the destruction of the Eldari and their remaining gods. It is said that this battle will destroy both the material universe and the Immaterium, that every last Eldari will perish in the fighting, though chaos will die with them. It is an end without hope, a final sacrifice that will purchase the destruction of the Eldari's eternal enemy at the cost of the Eldari themselves. Every strand of fate that the Eldari's farseers have been able to perceive has pointed toward this outcome. Every prophecy, every vision, every reading of the skein of destiny has shown the same thing, the ultimate victory of chaos in the Rana Dandra, followed by the complete annihilation of the Eldari species, as the Phoenix Lord Fugan is said to be the one who will gather the other Phoenix Lords together for this final battle, and it is he who will die last of all, burning brightly until the very end. It is the darkest of all prophecies, a sentence of doom hanging over an entire species. But the Crystal Tome of Segorach offers something different, something unprecedented. Within its pages, the Shadowseers found Segorach's ultimate jest, a plan, a cosmic trick, a performance of such audacity and scale that it could change the very nature of the Rana Dandra. According to the tome, Segorach has devised a way to turn Slaanesh's own power against her. Instead of the Eldari being destroyed in the final battle, Segarak's plan would trick Slaanesh into expending all of her energies not to destroy the Aeldari, but to save them. How such an impossibility could come to pass is unclear. The tome is, in the tradition of the Laughing God, infuriatingly vague on the specifics. It describes the shape of the plan without revealing its substance, outlines the broad strokes of the performance without specifying the individual movements. It is, in essence, the program for a play that has not yet been performed, the outline of a joke whose punchline has not yet been delivered. But the Harlequins take their god's words on faith alone. Their devotion to Chegarak is total, his methods beyond question or reproach. If the Laughing God says that there is a way to save the Aeldari from their prophesied doom, then the Harlequins will believe it. And more than believe it, they will act on it. They have begun the steps of this final dance, at the galaxy-spanning performance that the Crystal Tome describes, and they will see it completed or face absolute destruction in the attempt. The implications of this are staggering. If Segorak's plan is genuine, if the Crystal Tome truly contains the blueprint for saving the Aeldari species from annihilation, then the Black Library is not merely a repository of knowledge. It is the location of the single most important document in the history of the Aeldari species, a document that contains the key to their salvation. The protection of the library is no longer just a matter of preventing dangerous knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. It is a matter of protecting the roadmap to the Aeldari's survival as a species. And if anyone were to reach the library and destroy or alter the Crystal Tome before the Harlequins could complete their performance, the consequences would be incalculable. The last hope of the Aeldari would be extinguished, and the prophecy of the Rana Dandra would proceed unopposed toward its terrible conclusion. This is what makes Ahriman's continued attempts to breach the library so terrifying to the Aeldari. Not merely the knowledge that he might steal, but the damage he might do to the Crystal Tome and the plan it contains. Ahriman does not care about the Aeldari's salvation. He cares about his own goals, his own quest to reverse the rubric and restore the Thousand Suns. If he reached the heart of the library, if he gained access to the vault where the Crystal Tome rests, and he might not even recognize the significance of what he found. He might dismiss it as irrelevant to his purposes, or worse, he might damage or destroy it in his single-minded pursuit of the knowledge he seeks. This is why the defense of the Black Library is treated as the most sacred duty of the Harlequins. This is why they will fight to the last breath, the last dancer, the last echoing laugh to prevent any unauthorized being from reaching the library's heart. The stakes are not merely the preservation of knowledge. The stakes are the survival of an entire species and the future of the galaxy itself. The opening of the Great Rift, that vast wound in reality that split the galaxy in two in the closing years of the 41st millennium, brought unprecedented challenges to the Black Library and its guardians. Yet the birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum sent shockwaves through every dimension, including the webway. Even hidden in the labyrinthine depths of the webway, the Black Library was not immune to the turmoil. A section of the library itself fell into the warp, consumed by the chaotic energies that were tearing reality apart on a galactic scale. This loss was devastating. Whatever knowledge had been contained in that lost section, whatever volumes and artifacts and records had been housed there, was gone, swallowed by the very force that the library had been created to study and contain. The irony was not lost on the Harlequins, though their capacity for finding humor in tragedy is greater than most. But the opening of the Great Rift also brought something unexpected. It brought the opening of the Crystal Tome. As we have discussed, the chains of light that had sealed the tome since the fall had been linked to prophetic events, and the cascade of catastrophes that surrounded the birth of the Great Rift fulfilled the final conditions. The tome was open, its contents available to be read for the first time in 10,000 years. The timing was not coincidental. Chegarak had planned for this moment, had foreseen that the galaxy would need the knowledge contained in the Crystal Tome at precisely the moment when things looked their darkest. when the Great Rift split the galaxy in two, when half the Imperium was cut off from the light of the Astronomicon and plunged into darkness, when the forces of chaos seemed poised to overwhelm everything that had been built over 10 millennia of human and elderly civilization. That was the moment the laughing god chose to reveal his final jest. The current state of the Black Library exists in this context of unprecedented crisis and unprecedented hope. The library has been damaged, a section of it lost to the warp, but its core remains intact, and the crystal tome has been opened, revealing the path to the Eldari's potential salvation. The Harlequins are more active than they have been in millennia, prosecuting their war against chaos with a newfound urgency that reflects the cosmic stakes of the final dance they have begun. Some echoes of the Black Library persist within the material universe, traces of its presence that can occasionally be detected by those with the knowledge and sensitivity to perceive them, sometime after the opening of the Great Rift. And the last of these traces in real space were located at the western fringes of the Ghoul Stars, within a triangle formed by the Grand Shrine of Asurian and the exodite worlds of Sif and Quillan. Whether these echoes are intentional, left by the library's guardians as breadcrumbs for those worthy of finding them, or merely the unavoidable side effects of a structure of such enormous psychic power existing partially within the material dimension, is unknown. What is known is that the Black Library continues to function, continues to collect knowledge, continues to serve as both weapon and shield in the eternal war against chaos. Its guardians remain vigilant, its defenses remain formidable, and its contents remain the most comprehensive and most dangerous collection of knowledge about the warp and its inhabitants that exists anywhere in the galaxy. And the war for control of that knowledge continues as well. Ahriman has not abandoned his quest. The forces of chaos have not forgotten the prize that lies hidden in the webway. The Imperium, through the rare humans who have been granted glimpses of the library's existence, maintains a vague awareness that somewhere in the alien dimension of the webway, there is a place that contains answers to questions that humanity has been asking for 10,000 years. The broader implications of the Black Library extend far beyond the immediate question of who can or cannot gain access to its halls. The library's existence shapes the strategic calculations of every major power in the galaxy, even if most of them are not consciously aware of it. The knowledge contained within the library influences events through the actions of the Harlequins, who use the insights gained from the library's collections to guide their interventions in the conflicts that rage across the galaxy. Every time a Harlequin mask appears on a battlefield, striking from unexpected quarters to turn the tide of a battle in ways that seem inexplicable to outside observers, the knowledge of the Black Library is being applied. Every time a Shadow Seer uses their psychic abilities to guide events along a particular path, they are drawing on an understanding of chaos that has been refined over millions of years and preserved in the library's halls. The Inari, or the newest faction of the Eldari, led by Ivrain, the emissary of Iniad, represent another thread in the complex web of relationships that surrounds the Black Library. The emergence of the Inari and their partial awakening of Inead, the Eldari god of the dead, is closely connected to the prophecies contained within the library. The relationship between Segorak's plan as described in the Crystal Tome and the rise of Inead is a subject of intense speculation among those few beings who are aware of both. Some believe that Segorak and Inead are working toward the same goal, that the Laughing God's ultimate jest and the emergence of the Death God are two aspects of a single plan for the Eldari's salvation. Others suspect that Segorak has his own agenda, one that may not align perfectly with the goals of the Inari, and that the Crystal Tome's revelations may ultimately lead the Harlequins in a different direction. The relationship between the Black Library and the broader Eldari species is one of the most complex and contentious aspects of Eldari politics. The craft worlds, each with their own culture and priorities, have a complicated relationship with the Harlequins and the knowledge they guard. Some craft worlds, particularly Ulthwi, which is closest to the Eye of Terror and has the most direct experience with the dangers of chaos, maintain close ties with the Harlequins and benefit regularly from the insights that the Black Library provides. Others are more distant, viewing the Harlequins with a mixture of respect and suspicion, acknowledging their importance while resenting the secrecy that surrounds their activities. The Drukhari and the Dark Aeldari, who dwell in the vast city of Comora within the Webway, have their own relationship with the Black Library, though it is even more adversarial. The Drukhari are, in many ways, the living embodiment of the excesses that led to the fall. They have continued the practices of their ancestors, feeding on the suffering of others to sustain their souls and stave off the predation of Slaanesh. The Harlequins move through Comorach as they move through all Aeldari domains, performing their dances and delivering their messages, but the relationship is fraught with tension. The Drukhari have little interest in the Black Library's mission of preserving knowledge to fight chaos. They are interested in survival, in power, in the perpetuation of their own civilization, and they view the Harlequins' grand plans with the cynical detachment of a people who have long since abandoned hope for anything better. And yet, the Drukhari cannot ignore the Black Library entirely. The knowledge contained within its walls is relevant to their survival as well, particularly the knowledge concerning the nature of Slaanesh and the methods by which she who thirsts can be held at bay. The Drukhari's entire way of life is structured around the need to avoid Slaanesh's hunger, and any new insight into the workings of the Dark Prince is of potential value to them, even if they would never admit it openly. The Exodites, the rustic Aeldari, who live on distant worlds far from the main centers of Aeldari civilization, are even more removed from the Black Library's sphere of influence. Their knowledge of the library is limited, their interaction with the Harlequins infrequent, and their concerns largely focused on the defense of their individual worlds, rather than the grand cosmic dramas that play out on the galactic stage. But even the Exodites are not entirely disconnected from the library's influence. The Harlequins visit the Exodite worlds as they visit all Aeldari communities, and the performances they give carry encoded messages and insights drawn from the library's collections, filtered and distilled for audiences that may not even be aware of their significance. There is something profound about the Black Library that goes beyond its function as a mere repository of knowledge. It is, in a very real sense, the last complete monument to Aeldari civilization. The craft worlds are impressive, but they are scattered and fragmented, and each one carrying only a piece of what the Aeldari once were. The Exodite worlds preserve aspects of Aeldari culture, but in a deliberately simplified and reduced form. Comorach is a monument to excess and cruelty, a dark mirror of the civilization that spawned Slaanesh. Only the Black Library preserves the full scope of Aeldari knowledge in one place, the accumulated wisdom of a species that once ruled the galaxy. This is why the library matters so deeply to the Aeldari. It is not just a strategic asset or a weapon in their war against chaos. It is a symbol of everything they once were and everything they hope to be again. It is the proof that their civilization, for all its catastrophic failures, also produced moments of extraordinary wisdom and insight. It is the evidence that the Aeldari understood the dangers of chaos better than any other species in the galaxy, even if they ultimately fell victim to it themselves. And it is the repository of the plan that may, if Kegorak's jest succeeds, lead to their salvation. The Black Library stands as a lesson and a warning to every civilization in the galaxy. It tells us that knowledge is power, but also that knowledge is dangerous, that the understanding of evil is necessary to fight it, but that the very act of understanding it carries the risk of being consumed by it, that secrets must be kept, but that the keeping of secrets imposes a terrible burden on those who bear the responsibility, and that even in the darkest of times, in the grimmest and most desperate of circumstances, there may yet be hope, hidden away in a place that few can find, and fewer still can enter. waiting for the moment when it is most needed. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, the Black Library offers something rare and precious. It offers the possibility that there is more to existence than the endless cycle of violence and suffering that defines life in the 41st millennium. It offers the suggestion that somewhere, hidden in the spaces between dimensions, in the heart of a labyrinth within a labyrinth, there are answers to the questions that have haunted the Aeldari for 10,000 years. And if those answers can be found, if the Laughing God's final jest can be brought to its conclusion, then perhaps, just perhaps, the story of the Aeldari does not have to end in annihilation. Yet perhaps there is another ending waiting to be written, in inks of light and shadow, on pages of crystal that glow with the fire of a hope that has refused to die. But for now, the library endures. Somewhere in the depths of the webway, in a location known only to the Harlequins and the members of the Black Council, a vast and ancient structure drifts through the hidden dimension, its corridors filled with the accumulated knowledge of eons. Its guardians stand watch at its gates, their eyes bright and their weapons ready. Its white seers tend to their endless task of preservation and interpretation. And at its heart, in a silver-lit vault, the crystal tome lies open, its pages filled with the handwriting of a god, its words describing a future that might yet be better than the one that has been foretold. Yet the Black Library is the most secret repository in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It is a place of wonder and terror, of hope and despair, of knowledge so vast that it encompasses the entire history of the galaxy's relationship with the most dangerous force in existence. It is guarded by warriors who would die 1,000 deaths to protect it, sought by sorcerers who would burn 1,000 worlds to possess it, and feared by those who understand just how much power its contents represent. And it is, in its way, one of the most beautiful things in the setting. Because the Black Library represents the belief that knowledge matters, that understanding is worth preserving, even at enormous cost, that the wisdom of the past has value, even in a future that seems determined to destroy everything of worth. In a galaxy where so much has been lost, or where entire civilizations have been ground to dust under the wheels of war, the Black Library stands as a monument to the conviction that some things are worth saving. Let us talk now about the specific tomes and artifacts that make the Black Library so coveted, because the individual pieces of the collection deserve their own attention. We have mentioned the Book of Magnus and the Book of Lorgar, but these are merely the most famous examples of a collection that spans millions of volumes and countless forms of recorded knowledge. The Book of Mournful Night is one such volume, a text whose very name suggests the nature of its contents. The Cries of Isha, named for the goddess of fertility who is said to be imprisoned in the Garden of Nurgle, is another. But these names hint at the emotional as well as the intellectual weight of the library's collection. These are not dry academic texts, not clinical studies of phenomena observed from a safe distance. These are records written by beings who have personally experienced the horrors of chaos, who have witnessed the destruction of civilizations and the damnation of souls, and who have set down their knowledge in the desperate hope that others might learn from their suffering. Then there is the Book of the Rana Dandra, the Book of Fate, which we have already mentioned in the context of Inquisitor Jack Draco's audacious theft. This volume is remarkable not just for its contents, but for its nature. It is a mutable book, a text whose contents change as the future it describes shifts and transforms. The runes that decorate its pages writhe as if they are alive, rearranging themselves in real time to reflect the constantly shifting probabilities of the future. To read the Book of the Rana Dandra is not merely to study a prophecy, but to watch it evolve, to see the possible futures branching and merging and reshaping themselves before your eyes. The fact that Inquisitor Draco managed to steal this book from the Black Library is one of the most audacious acts of theft in the history of the galaxy. Draco was not invited in like Chevak. He found his own way into the library, guided by the Emperor's Tarot, a divination system that uses psychic imagery to reveal paths and possibilities. That a human could navigate the webway, evade the library's defenses, reach the vault where the Book of Fate was kept. But an escape with it in hand is almost beyond belief. It speaks to either extraordinary luck, extraordinary ability, or the intervention of a higher power, perhaps the Emperor himself, guiding his agent toward a prize that he deemed essential. The Eldari were outraged by the theft. The Farseer Eldrad Ulthran, perhaps the most famous and influential of all Eldari Farseers, attempted to divine the future in the wake of the book's loss, trying to determine what Draco intended to do with it, and what the consequences of its theft might be. The Harlequins sent agents to recover the book, but Draco proved remarkably adept at evading pursuit, using his knowledge of Imperial space and his connections within the Inquisition to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. What Draco actually wanted to do with the Book of Fate was deeply personal and, out in the context of the Imperium's grim reality, almost touching. He wanted to use the knowledge contained within the book to reverse time itself, to save the life of a woman he had loved and lost. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of settings, even in a universe defined by war and suffering, individual human emotions, love, grief, the desperate desire to undo a personal tragedy, can drive events of cosmic significance. Each of these volumes, and the countless others that fill the library's shelves and chambers, represents a piece of the puzzle that is the nature of chaos. Individually, they are dangerous but limited. The Book of Magnus is a powerful tool for sorcery, but it cannot by itself reveal the full truth of the warp's workings. The Book of Lorgar provides a theological framework for chaos worship, but it does not contain the counter-arguments, the defenses, the methods by which that worship can be resisted and defeated. It is only in aggregate, only when the entire collection is considered as a whole, that the true power of the Black Library becomes apparent. Because the Black Library does not merely contain knowledge, it contains context. It contains the relationships between different pieces of knowledge, the connections and contradictions and complementary insights that can only be perceived when the full scope of the collection is available. A single book about demon summoning is dangerous but limited. 1,000 books about daemon summoning, cross-referenced with analyses of demonic weaknesses and records of successful banishments and studies of the psychic techniques used by different species to combat warp entities, has become something far more powerful. It becomes a comprehensive understanding of the phenomenon, an understanding that can be used not just to summon demons, but to fight them, to predict their behavior, to identify their weaknesses, and ultimately, to defeat them. This is what makes the Black Library irreplaceable. Other repositories of knowledge about chaos exist in the galaxy. The Inquisition maintains its own archives. The Grey Knights chapter of the Adeptus Astartes has accumulated significant knowledge about demonic entities through millennia of fighting them. Various radical inquisitors and xenophile scholars have assembled private collections of forbidden lore. But none of these collections comes close to matching the scope and depth of the Black Library. None of them has the millions of years of accumulated Eldari wisdom that forms the backbone of the library's collection. And none of them has the crystal tome of Segorach, the document that may hold the key to the Eldari's salvation, and, by extension, the salvation of all the species that struggle against the tide of chaos. There is a sense in which the Black Library is the most important location in the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting. More important than Terror, more important than the Eye of Terror, more important than the Planet of the Sorcerers, or the Garden of Nurgle, or the Skull Throne of Horn. Because the Black Library contains the one thing that all other powers in the galaxy lack: complete understanding. The Chaos Gods are powerful, but they are also by their nature irrational, and driven by the emotions and desires that define them, rather than by reasoned analysis. The Imperium is vast, but it is also willfully ignorant. Its religion of the God Emperor, teaching that knowledge of chaos is itself a form of heresy. The Necrons possess ancient technology, but their understanding of the warp is limited by their fundamental disconnection from the psychic dimension. Only the Black Library offers the possibility of true comprehension, of a complete and nuanced understanding of the force that threatens all life in the galaxy. And that, ultimately, is why the Black Library matters. Not because of the power it represents, though that power is immense. Not because of the secrets it contains, though those secrets could reshape the galaxy. But because of the understanding it offers. The understanding that is the only real weapon against the darkness that presses in from all sides. The only real defense against the corruption that whispers in the ears of the powerful and the desperate and the curious. Knowledge is the light that holds back the darkness. And the Black Library is the greatest source of that light in all the galaxy. We have now covered the broad strokes of the Black Library's story, from its ancient origins to its significance in the current era of darkness and upheaval. But there is so much more beneath the surface, so many details and dimensions and hidden depths that deserve our full attention. The story of the Black Library is like the library itself, layered and shifting, revealing new chambers and new corridors the deeper you go. So let us go deeper still. So as we come to the end of our journey through the corridors and vaults of this most secret of places, let us take a moment to appreciate what we have learned. We have traced the history of the webway from its creation by the Old Ones to its inheritance by the Eldari. We have witnessed the catastrophe of the fall and the desperate measures that were taken to preserve the Eldari's knowledge in the aftermath of that unimaginable disaster. We have met Segorach, the Laughing God, whose trickster's wisdom created the library and whose inscrutable plans continue to shape events across the galaxy. We have learned of the guardians who protect the library with their lives, the Harlequins and the White Seers, and the mysterious guardian scribes, whose very existence is a source of dread. We have walked through the library's shifting halls and examined its most famous and most dangerous contents, from the Book of Magnus to the Crystal Tome of Kegorak. We have followed the story of Bronislaw Chevak, the human inquisitor who earned the right to study within the library's walls and who made off with one of its most precious artifacts. We have charted the 10,000-year obsession of Ahriman, the arch-sorcerer, who has dedicated his existence to breaching the library's defenses and who has come agonizingly close to success without ever quite achieving his goal. We have seen the Emperor's doomed attempt to build humanity's own access to the webway and the tragic consequences of that attempt's failure. We have learned of the Rana Dandra, the prophesied final battle of the Eldari, and of Kegorak's extraordinary plan to change its outcome. And we have contemplated the Black Library's significance in the broader context of the galaxy, its role as both weapon and shield, its importance as a symbol of the enduring value of knowledge in a universe that seems determined to destroy everything of worth. The Black Library is a place of mystery and wonder and terrible danger. It is a monument to the belief that understanding matters, that knowledge is worth preserving, that the accumulated wisdom of millions of years should not be allowed to fade into oblivion. It is the last, best repository of the secrets that the galaxy needs if it is to survive the darkness that threatens to consume it. And somewhere in the depths of the webway, protected by warriors who would die before allowing its secrets to fall into the wrong hands, guided by a trickster god whose ultimate plans remain beyond mortal comprehension, the Black Library endures. It waits, it watches, and it keeps its secrets, sharing them only with those who have earned the right to know them and who have the strength of will to bear the burden of that knowledge. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Black Library offers something that no army and no weapon can provide. It offers understanding, and in the end, understanding may be the only thing that can save us all. But before we bring this journey to its final close, there is more we must explore. More depth to uncover, more threads to follow, but more secrets to reveal about this extraordinary place that sits at the intersection of every major conflict in the galaxy. Let us now take some time to more fully appreciate the nature of the webway itself, because you cannot truly understand the Black Library without first sitting with the sheer strangeness and the ancient wonder of the dimension that contains it. We have discussed the webway's origins, its creation by the Old Ones, and its expansion by the Aeldari, but we have barely scratched the surface of what the webway actually is, what it feels like to travel through it, and why it matters so much to the story we are telling. The webway has been described in many ways by many different sources, and no two descriptions quite agree. Some envision it as a vast network of shimmering strands, like the threads of some impossibly complex textile stretching across the galaxy. Others describe it as a maze of glowing tunnels, their walls pulsing with a soft, sourceless light that seems to shift and change depending on the mood or the intention of the traveler. Still others have compared it to the veins and arteries of some vast living organism, a circulatory system for the galaxy itself, carrying not blood, but information and consciousness, and the echoes of millions of years of travel. The truth, if truth is even the right word to apply to something as fundamentally strange as the webway, is that it is all of these things and none of them. The webway is not a physical place in the way that a planet or a star system is a physical place. It exists in the space between dimensions, or in the narrow gap that separates the material universe from the immaterium. It is a construct, an artificial space, carved out of the raw stuff of interdimensional reality by beings whose understanding of the universe was so complete that they could reshape the boundaries between different planes of existence as easily as a sculptor shapes clay. What this means in practical terms is that the webway does not follow the rules of normal space. Distance within the webway does not correspond to distance in the material universe. A journey that would require traveling halfway across the galaxy in real space might take only a few steps within the webway, while a destination that seems nearby in galactic terms might require navigating a labyrinthine series of tunnels and passages that stretches for what feels like days or weeks of travel time. That the relationship between the webway's internal geometry and the external geography of the galaxy is complex, non-linear, and in some places, seemingly arbitrary. Time within the webway is equally strange. The Harlequins speak of remote locations within the webway where the flow of time goes in reverse, where the past becomes the future and the future becomes the past. There are places where time does not flow at all, where a traveler could remain for what feels like hours and emerge to find that centuries have passed in the outside universe, or alternatively, emerge to find that no time has passed at all. The Aeldari knew about these temporal anomalies and, according to some sources, deliberately chose not to experiment with them, fearful of the consequences that might result from manipulating the flow of time itself. One such location is known as the Crossroads of Inertia, a place within the webway where time is said to be completely still. Another is a location known as Uigebealach, where the flow of time runs backward. These are places of extraordinary danger and extraordinary potential, places where the normal rules of cause and effect break down entirely, and where the consequences of any action are unpredictable and potentially catastrophic. The webway also has a property that is particularly relevant to the story of the Black Library. It appears to have a regenerative effect on living tissue. Inquisitor Chevak, who spent several standard years within the webway during his time at the Black Library, emerged looking dramatically younger than when he entered. The psychic emanations of the webway seemed to have reversed the aging of his body, restoring vitality and health that had been lost to centuries of life. This property has led some to theorize that the webway may be partially responsible for the extraordinary longevity of the Aeldari species, that constant travel through the webway's corridors may have contributed to the millennia-long lifespans that the Aeldari have always enjoyed. If this theory is correct, it adds another layer of significance to the Black Library's location. The library exists within the webway, not merely because the webway is hidden and protected, but because the webway itself is a nurturing environment, a space where living beings can thrive and where the passage of time can be slowed or reversed. The white seers who tend the library's collection, the harlequins who guard its gates, the very books and artifacts that fill its shelves. All of them benefit from the webway's regenerative properties, their preservation aided by the nature of the dimension they inhabit. But the webway is not entirely benign. Far from it. In its current state, the webway is a damaged and dangerous place, a labyrinth of broken corridors and sealed passages and dead ends that can trap the unwary. The damage inflicted during the War in Heaven, when the Necrons breached the webway's walls through their dolmen gates, was only the beginning. The fall of the Aeldari caused massive additional damage, the psychic shockwave of Slaanesh's birth rupturing the webway's structure in countless places. Many passages that were once safe and navigable are now breached, their walls cracked or broken, allowing the energies of the warp to seep in and the entities that inhabit the warp to gain access to corridors they should never have been able to reach. These breached sections are sealed with runes of psychic power, wards placed by Eldari seers to prevent whatever horrors have taken up residence in the damaged tunnels from gaining access to the intact portions of the network. But these wards are not perfect, and they require constant maintenance. The effort to keep the webway functional, to patrol its corridors and maintain its defenses and prevent the breached sections from expanding, is a never-ending task that consumes a significant portion of the Eldari's resources and attention. And then there is Comora, the Dark City. This vast metropolis, the home of the Drukhari, lies entirely within the webway. It is a place of nightmare and wonder, a city so vast that thousands of starships dock at its spires each day, a sprawling urban center that has grown and expanded over the millennia until it occupies a significant portion of the webway's usable space. The relationship between Comora and the Black Library is complex and adversarial. The Drukhari have their own interests in the webway, their own claims to its corridors and resources, and they view the Harlequin's control of the Black Library with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect. The webway, in all its damaged, dangerous, wondrous complexity, is the setting against which the story of the Black Library plays out. It is the ocean through which the library drifts, the sky through which it flies, the labyrinth through which its guardians navigate on their endless missions. Without the webway, the Black Library could not exist. It would have no place to hide, no dimension to occupy, no network of corridors and passages through which its agents could travel to collect the knowledge that fills its shelves. The library and the webway are inseparable, two aspects of a single reality, the hidden dimension and the hidden repository, existing together in the space between spaces. Now, having established the full scope of the webway and its relationship to the library, let us turn our attention to something we have only briefly touched on: the physical experience of the Black Library itself. What would it actually be like to walk through its gates, to stand within its halls, to breathe the air of the most secret place in the galaxy? We must piece this together from fragmentary accounts, because the number of beings who have entered the Black Library and lived to describe the experience is extraordinarily small. But from the accounts we have, from the observations recorded in the various sources that touch on the library, and from the descriptions given by those who have walked its corridors, we can construct something approaching a picture. The Black Library is described as resembling a vast, impossible craft world. Craft worlds, for those who may not be familiar with them, are the continent-sized vessels of living wraithbone that carry the surviving Asuryani Eldari through the void between stars. They are enormous, each one a self-contained world with its own ecology, its own culture, and its own identity. The Black Library is said to resemble one of these craft worlds, but with significant differences that set it apart from any other vessel of its kind. The most obvious difference is its location. While the other craft worlds drift through the material universe, traveling through space in the conventional sense, the Black Library exists entirely within the webway. It is a craft world that has never seen open space, that has never been exposed to the light of a star or the radiation of a nebula. Its environment is entirely artificial, entirely controlled, entirely contained within the protected corridors of the labyrinth dimension. The second difference is its nature as a labyrinth within a labyrinth. The Black Library does not have a fixed layout. its corridors and chambers rearrange themselves, as shifting and changing in patterns that follow a logic that is neither random nor predictable by conventional means. This is a feature, not a flaw. The library's shifting nature is part of its defense system, ensuring that no intruder can map its interior and plan a route to its most sensitive areas. Only those who are attuned to the library's consciousness, who have been granted permission by its infinity circuit to navigate its halls, can find their way through the ever-changing labyrinth. The library's infinity circuit is another extraordinary feature. Like the infinity circuits of the craft worlds, which serve as repositories for the souls of deceased Eldari, the Black Library possesses its own psychic network. But while the craft world infinity circuits are primarily passive, storing and preserving the consciousnesses of the dead, the library's circuit is active and responsive. It is, in a sense, the library's mind, a collective consciousness that perceives and evaluates everyone and everything within the library's walls. It is this mind that bars the weak and the corruptible, that tests those who seek entry, and that guides authorized visitors through the shifting corridors to the materials they need. Imagine, if you can, what it would be like to walk through a place like this. The corridors stretch before you, their walls made of living wraithbone that pulses faintly with psychic energy. The light is silver-tinged and sourceless, emanating from the very structure of the library itself, casting no shadows and creating no glare. The air is clean and still, with a quality that suggests immense age and perfect preservation, and as though the atmosphere itself has been maintained unchanged for millennia. As you walk, the corridors seem to shift subtly around you. A passage that led straight ahead a moment ago now curves gently to the left. A door that you did not notice before appears in the wall beside you. The library is responding to your presence, to the questions in your mind and the needs that drive you, reshaping itself to provide or deny access according to criteria that you cannot fully understand. And the books, the shelves, the collections, chamber after chamber filled with materials in every conceivable format, bound volumes of such extraordinary age that the very act of touching them seems presumptuous, crystal matrices that contain psychic recordings, memories and experiences preserved in forms that can be relived by a sufficiently sensitive mind. Our scrolls written in languages that have been dead for millions of years, their characters still sharp and clear despite the passage of eons. Sealed containers holding fragments of warp energy, stabilized and preserved, representing the distilled essence of particular demonic entities or particular interactions between the material universe and the immaterium. Some chambers are warm and inviting, their shelves organized with a logic that even a human mind can follow, their contents accessible and comprehensible with sufficient patience and study. Others are sealed behind barriers of psychic energy that glow with a faint, menacing light, the materials within too dangerous for casual access, too volatile to be handled without specific preparation and specific permissions. And still others are locked away behind doors that do not open. Their existence acknowledged, but their contents considered too dangerous even for the most trusted and most capable of the library's authorized visitors. The library's atmosphere is one of profound silence and immense weight. Not the weight of physical mass, but the weight of accumulated knowledge, of millions of years of recorded experience pressing in from all sides. There is a sense of being observed, of being evaluated, that is not threatening, but is certainly present. The library's mind is always aware of you, always assessing, always determining whether you should be allowed to continue deeper or whether you should be gently redirected back toward the entrance. Among the most remarkable sections of the Black Library is the Wraith Tower. This is the portion of the library specifically devoted to humanity's interaction with chaos. It is here that the accumulated lore of the Imperial traitors is stored, the records of 10,000 years of human heresy, corruption, and damnation. The Wraith Tower contains information about every major chaos cult that has ever existed within the Imperium, every significant act of heresy and betrayal that has been committed in the name of the Dark Gods, every piece of intelligence about the traitor legions and their methods and their motivations that the library's agents have been able to gather over the millennia. This is the section of the library that Chevak was primarily granted access to during his stay. The Black Council determined that the most useful contribution Chevak could make was to study the Wraith Tower's collection and provide insights into the human perspective on humanity's interaction with chaos. Insights that the Aeldari themselves, as an alien species, might have difficulty developing on their own. It was a pragmatic decision, one that recognized the value of a human perspective while limiting the scope of what Chevak was allowed to see. What Chevak learned during his time in the Wraith Tower has never been fully revealed. The Inquisitor has shared fragments of his knowledge with select individuals within the Imperium, but the full scope of what he discovered remains locked within his mind. Given that the Wraith Tower contains the most comprehensive record of human heresy in existence, the knowledge Chevak gained during his studies is potentially explosive. It could challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of the Imperium's relationship with chaos, reveal hidden connections between seemingly unrelated events, and expose vulnerabilities that neither the Imperium nor the forces of chaos would want made public. Let us also consider more carefully the story of Inquisitor Jack Draco, whose theft of the Book of the Rana Dandra represents one of the most audacious and consequential acts in the recent history of the library. Draco was not a typical Inquisitor. He was an outlaw, a renegade whose methods and motivations placed him outside the normal structures of Imperial authority. His journey to the Black Library was not planned in the careful, methodical way that Chevak's visit had been arranged. Draco followed the Emperor's Tarot, a divinatory tool that uses psychically charged imagery to reveal hidden paths and future possibilities. Through the Tarot, Draco was guided to an entrance to the webway, and through a combination of psychic ability, it's a determination, and what can only be described as divine intervention, he managed to navigate the webway's treacherous corridors and reach the Black Library itself. What happened when Draco arrived at the library is a story of remarkable daring. He penetrated the library's defenses, reached the vault where the Book of the Rana Dandra was kept, and seized the book. The fact that he was able to do this at all suggests either a catastrophic failure of the library's security systems, or more likely, that his intrusion was somehow anticipated or even facilitated by forces beyond his understanding. The Emperor's guiding hand, working through the Tarot, may have been providing Draco with the means to breach defenses that should have been impenetrable to a human intruder. The Book of the Rana Dandra that Draco stole was a remarkable object in its own right. It rested within an arabesque cage upon an ebon podium, its binding encrusted with gems that included sapphires, emeralds, topaz, and tourmaline, all of them glittering with an inner light that suggested they were more than mere decorative stones. There was speculation among the humans, who later examined the book, that the diamonds on its surface might have been spirit stones, the psychocrystalline receptacles in which the Aeldari preserve their souls after death. If this is true, it means that the Book of Fate was literally decorated with the preserved consciousnesses of ancient Aeldari seers, their wisdom and their foresight woven into the very fabric of the book's binding. The contents of the Book of the Rana Dandra were, as we have mentioned, immutable. The text changed as the future it described shifted and evolved. The runes on its pages writhed and rearranged themselves in real time, reflecting the constantly branching possibilities of events yet to come. For a human reader, assuming they had the knowledge of the Aeldari language necessary to decipher the text, reading the Book of Fate would have been an extraordinary and disorienting experience, the literary equivalent of watching a river change course before your eyes. Draco's intention for the book was deeply personal. He had lost someone he loved, a Kalidas assassin named Melindi, and he believed that the knowledge contained within the Book of Fate could lead him to the crossroads of inertia, the place within the webway where time could be reversed. He wanted to turn back the clock and to undo the death that had broken him, and he was willing to steal from the most dangerous repository in the galaxy and make enemies of an entire alien species to do it. In the grim and terrible setting of Warhammer 40,000, where so many characters are motivated by duty or ambition or religious fervor, Draco's motivation stands out as something almost poignantly human. Simple, overwhelming grief, and the desperate desire to save someone he had lost. The Aeldari's response to the theft was swift and furious. Farseer Eldrad Ulthran, the most powerful and influential of the Aeldari Farseers, devoted significant resources to tracking Draco and recovering the stolen book. Harlequin agents were dispatched to intercept the Inquisitor, leading to a series of confrontations that played out across multiple worlds and dimensions. The recovery of the Book of Fate was treated as a matter of the highest priority, its loss considered potentially catastrophic for the Aeldari species. What is fascinating about the stories of both Chevak and Draco is what they reveal about the Black Library's relationship with humanity. The library was not created for humans. It was not designed with human needs or human capabilities in mind. And yet, on multiple occasions, individual humans have managed to interact with the library in significant ways, whether through invitation, as in Chevak's case, or through unauthorized intrusion, as in Draco's case. This suggests that the boundary between the Aeldari's secret knowledge and the human realm is not as impenetrable as the library's guardians might wish. The existence of the Illuminati, as those humans who have been possessed by a demon and then exorcised, and who are subsequently allowed to enter the Black Library at will, reinforces this point. The library's defenses are designed to keep out the unworthy, not the non-Aeldari. If a human has the strength of will, the purity of purpose, and the mastery of their own inner darkness necessary to satisfy the library's standards, they can gain entry. The library does not discriminate based on species. It discriminates based on character. This is a remarkably open-minded stance for an Aeldari institution, and it speaks to the wisdom that underlies the library's design. Tegorach, when he created the library, understood that the war against chaos is not an Aeldari-only endeavor. Every species in the galaxy faces the threat of the ruinous powers. Every civilization is vulnerable to corruption, to the seductive whispers of the dark gods, to the slow erosion of moral certainty that chaos specializes in. By allowing worthy individuals from any species to access the library's knowledge, Tegorach ensured that the weapon he had created could be wielded by anyone with the strength and the wisdom to use it properly. Of course, the Laughing God may have had other motives as well. Tegorach is, above all else, a trickster, and his actions are never entirely straightforward. Allowing humans into the library may serve purposes that go beyond simple altruism. It may be a way of spreading the knowledge necessary to fight chaos to the species that is currently the most populous and the most powerful in the galaxy. It may be a way of creating allies in the war against the ruinous powers, or of manipulating human affairs in ways that serve the Aeldari's interests. Or it may be one of the Laughing God's jests, a prank played on the cosmic scale, whose punchline will only become apparent in some distant future that Tegorach alone can foresee. Let us turn now to a topic we have not yet addressed in full: the specific defensive measures that protect the Black Library from those who would seek to breach its walls by force. We have spoken of the Harlequins and the Guardian Scribes and the library's own psychic consciousness, but the full scope of the library's defenses is more extensive and more formidable than any single layer of protection could suggest. The first line of defense is the webway itself. The routes leading to the Black Library are not mapped in any accessible format. The library moves through the webway, and traveling along paths that only the Harlequins and the members of the Black Council know. Even if an intruder managed to enter the webway, finding the library within its vast labyrinthine corridors would be an almost impossible task. The webway is enormous, stretching across the entire galaxy, and the library occupies a tiny fraction of its total volume. Searching for it without guidance would be like searching for a single grain of sand on a beach that spans an entire continent. The second line of defense is the concealment of the library's entrances. The Black Library does not have a single, fixed entrance. Instead, its access points shift and change. appearing and disappearing in different locations within the webway, according to patterns known only to the library's guardians. These entrances are hidden behind veils of riddle and illusion, psychic constructs that confuse and misdirect those who stumble upon them. Even if you found an entrance, you might not recognize it as such, or you might find yourself led through a series of false corridors that deposit you right back where you started. The third line of defense is the guardian scribes. As we have mentioned, these beings are described as among the most terrible perils in the webway. They stand watch at the actual entrances to the library, and they are the final physical barrier between the outside universe and the library's contents. Whatever the guardian scribes actually are, whatever powers they possess, and whatever methods they employ against intruders, they are feared even by the Aeldari, a species that does not frighten easily. The fourth line of defense is the library's infinity circuit, the collective psychic consciousness that permeates the entire structure. This consciousness is not merely a passive observer. It is an active defense system, capable of directly influencing the minds and perceptions of those within the library's walls. It can create illusions, generate psychic barriers, reshape the library's internal layout to trap or misdirect intruders, and even directly assault the consciousness of those who are deemed to be a threat. For a being who is not psychically gifted, the library's mind would be an invisible but implacable enemy. For a being who is psychically gifted, the library's mind would be an opponent of extraordinary power and sophistication, capable of matching their abilities and overwhelming them through sheer psychic force. And the fifth line of defense is the most fundamental of all. It is the requirement that anyone who enters the library must have mastered the chaos within themselves. This is not a physical barrier or a psychic test that can be overcome through brute force. It is a state of being that must be achieved before entry is possible. A person who has not confronted and conquered their own inner darkness, who has not come to terms with the darkest aspects of their nature and emerged from the struggle with their integrity intact, simply cannot enter the library. The library will not permit it. Its consciousness will recognize the unresolved conflict within them and will deny them access, no matter how physically or psychically powerful they may be. This last defense is arguably the most elegant and the most effective, whilst it means that the library cannot be breached by any being who is vulnerable to corruption, regardless of how powerful they are. A chaos sorcerer of immense psychic ability, a demon prince of terrifying power, a champion of chaos blessed by all four of the ruinous powers. None of them could enter the library, because none of them have mastered the chaos within themselves. They have submitted to it, embraced it, allowed it to define them. And submission is the opposite of mastery. This is why Ahriman, for all his power, has never succeeded in reaching the library's interior. Ahriman may be the most powerful mortal sorcerer in the galaxy, but he is also a being who has been shaped by chaos, who has drawn on the power of the warp for 10,000 years, who has allowed the energies of Tzeentch to flow through him even as he denies being the chaos god's servant. Whatever Ahriman tells himself about his independence, whatever justifications he constructs for his actions, the truth is that he has not mastered the chaos within himself. He has been mastered by it, even if that mastery takes a form subtle enough that Ahriman himself does not recognize it. And because of this, the library's most fundamental defense remains unbreachable against him. This raises a fascinating philosophical question about the nature of the war against chaos that runs through the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting. The Black Library's entrance requirement suggests that the most important battle against chaos is not fought on the battlefield, not decided by bolter fire or psychic power or strategic genius. Yet the most important battle against chaos is the one fought within the individual's soul, the struggle to know oneself fully, to confront the darkness within, and to emerge from that confrontation whole and uncorrupted. This is a message that resonates beyond the fictional setting. In a universe where chaos represents the worst impulses of intelligent life, given form and power, the defense that matters most is not external, but internal. Not the walls you build around yourself, but the honesty with which you examine yourself. Not the weapons you carry, but the strength of character that allows you to resist the temptation to use those weapons for the wrong reasons. The Black Library teaches us that knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, that power without self-knowledge is destructive, and that the only true defense against corruption is the courage to look into the darkest corners of your own nature and refuse to be defined by what you find there. It is a lesson that every faction in the Warhammer 40,000 universe needs to learn, and that very few have managed to absorb. Before we proceed further, there is another dimension of Ahriman's story that deserves a much fuller treatment, because the tragedy of Ahriman is not merely the tragedy of a single sorcerer who failed to achieve his goal. It is the tragedy of an entire legion, and the story of the Black Library cannot be fully appreciated without understanding what drove the greatest sorcerer of the Thousand Sons to his obsessive, millennia-spanning quest. The Thousand Sons were always different from the other Space Marine legions, and where the other legions prided themselves on physical prowess or tactical genius or unwavering faith, the Thousand Sons valued knowledge above all else. They were scholars and sorcerers, warriors who believed that understanding the warp and harnessing its power was not heresy, but the highest expression of human potential. Their primarch, Magnus the Red, was the most powerful psyker among the Emperor's sons, a being of towering intellect and insatiable curiosity, who taught his legion that the pursuit of knowledge was their sacred duty. This philosophy brought the Thousand Sons into conflict with the other legions long before the Horus heresy tore the Imperium apart. At the Council of Nicaea, a gathering convened by the Emperor himself to debate the role of psychic powers in the Imperium, the Thousand Sons were censured and their practices forbidden. Magnus was ordered to disband his librarius and to cease the psychic practices that defined his legion's identity. For a legion that understood itself primarily through its relationship with the warp, this was not merely a tactical adjustment. It was an existential crisis. What happened next is well known. Magnus, desperate to warn the Emperor about Horus's betrayal, used his psychic powers to project a message directly to Terra, an act that required him to breach the Emperor's psychic wards around the throne world. This breach was the catastrophe that destroyed the Emperor's Webway project, tearing open the barrier between the Webway and the warp, and allowing demonic entities to flood into the human-built sections of the labyrinth dimension. The Emperor, who had been personally maintaining the wards that kept the Webway portal sealed, was forced to abandon the project entirely and devote all his psychic energy to preventing the demons from reaching Terra through the breach. The consequences for the Thousand Sons were equally devastating. The Emperor, enraged by what he perceived as Magnus's disobedience and the destruction of his greatest project, dispatched the Space Wolves to bring Magnus to account. What followed was the burning of Prospero, the Thousand Sons' homeworld, a devastating battle that saw the Legion nearly destroyed and that drove Magnus and his surviving sons into the arms of Tzeentch, the very chaos god whose influence the Emperor had sought to prevent them from falling under. And then came the rubric, Ahriman, and horrified by the mutations that were consuming his battle brothers as chaos tightened its grip on the Legion, attempted a vast and ambitious spell to save them. The rubric of Ahriman was supposed to halt the mutations and stabilize the Thousand Sons' genetic structure. Instead, it destroyed them. Every Thousand Sons Marine who lacked sufficient psychic ability was reduced to dust, their consciousness trapped within their sealed power armor, transformed into the rubric Marines, mindless automatons who walked and fought, but no longer lived in any meaningful sense. The rubric was Ahriman's greatest failure, and it is the wound that drives everything he does. He did not merely fail to save his brothers, he destroyed them, reducing them to dust and ash. He's stripping away everything that made them individuals and leaving only hollow shells animated by residual sorcery. The guilt of this act haunts Ahriman across the millennia, and his obsession with the Black Library is, at its deepest level, an attempt to find the knowledge necessary to reverse the rubric, to restore his brothers to their former selves, to undo the terrible mistake that has defined his existence for 10,000 years. This makes Ahriman a fundamentally sympathetic figure, despite the terrible things he has done in pursuit of his goal. He is not seeking the Black Library for power or for conquest. He is seeking it for redemption, for the chance to undo the worst mistake of his life, and to save the brothers he accidentally destroyed. Every world he has devastated, every life he has sacrificed, every atrocity he has committed in the name of his quest, has been motivated by love and guilt, and the desperate hope that somewhere, in the deepest vaults of the most secret library in the galaxy, there is an answer that can make things right. The tragedy is that the library's very nature makes it inaccessible to him. The mastery of inner chaos that the library demands is exactly what Ahriman lacks. His guilt over the rubric, his anger at the Emperor for condemning his legion, his resentment of Magnus for leading them into damnation, his fear that his quest is ultimately futile. All of these unresolved emotions are the very chaos that the library's defenses detect and repel. To enter the library, Ahriman would need to make peace with his past, to accept what he has done and what has been done to him, to release the guilt and the anger and the fear that have driven him for 10,000 years. And that is something he cannot do, because to release those emotions would be to accept that his brothers cannot be saved, and that acceptance is the one thing Ahriman refuses to contemplate. It is a perfect, beautiful, terrible circle. The thing that Ahriman needs is in the library, but the thing that drives him to seek it is the thing that keeps him out. His love for his brothers is the source of his quest, and the pain of their loss is the barrier he cannot cross. The laughing god, if he is aware of this irony, must find it simultaneously hilarious and heartbreaking. Now, let us also consider the Inari and their relationship to the Black Library, for this is a development that has emerged in recent lore and has significant implications for the library's future role in the galaxy. The Inari are a new faction among the Aeldari, united by their devotion to Ennead, the god of the dead. Ennead is, in theory, the final Aeldari god, a deity that will be born from the combined death energy of the entire Aeldari species. For most of Aeldari history, the birth of Ennead was associated with the Rana Dandra, the final battle, when the Aeldari would sacrifice themselves in a cosmic conflagration that would create Ennead and, through Ennead's power, destroy Slaanesh and free the Aeldari from the curse of the Dark Prince forever. But the Inari represent a different approach, led by the prophet Ivrain, who serves as the emissary of Ennead. The Inari believe that it is possible to awaken Ennead without the total destruction of the Aeldari species. They seek to gather the Kronzords, a set of powerful artifacts that can catalyze Ennead's birth, and to use the Death God's power to defeat Slaanesh without requiring the sacrifice of every Aeldari soul in existence. The relationship between the Inari and the Black Library is significant because the library contains the most comprehensive record of the prophecy that the Inari are attempting to fulfill. The Crystal Tome of Kegorach, which we have discussed, contains the Laughing God's plan for the Rana Dandra, a plan that may involve the use of Ennead's power in ways that neither the Inari nor anyone else fully understands. If the Inari are to succeed in their mission, they may need access to the knowledge contained within the library, knowledge that could clarify the prophecy, guide their search for the Kronzords, and provide the understanding necessary to navigate the incredibly dangerous process of awakening a god. But the library's guardians have their own agenda, and it does not necessarily align with the Inari's plans. The Harlequins serve Kegorach, not Ennead, and Segorach's plans for the Rana Dandra may be very different from what the Inari envision. The tension between Segorach's scheme and the Inari's mission is one of the most interesting unresolved threads in current Warhammer 40,000 lore, a conflict that could play out in the corridors of the Black Library itself as different factions within the Aeldari struggle to determine the future of their species. There is also the question of what the fifth Kronzord might be. 4 of the Kronzords have been identified, but the location and nature of the fifth remain a mystery. Some sources suggest that the fifth sword may be held by Slaanesh personally, locked away in the Dark Prince's palace in the depths of the warp, a place from which no retrieval seems possible. But others suggest that information about the fifth sword, perhaps even the sword itself, may be found within the Black Library. If the library holds the key to locating or creating the final Kronesword, then the fate of the Inari's mission and the future of the entire Aeldari species may depend on what is hidden within its shifting halls. The Harlequins themselves have become divided over the Inari question. The Mask of the Midnight Sorrow and several other Harlequin troops have aligned themselves with the Inari, believing that Yvrain's mission represents the best hope for the Aeldari's survival. Others remain loyal to Kegorak's original plan, whatever that plan might be, and view the Inari as well-meaning but potentially dangerous interlopers whose actions could disrupt the Laughing God's carefully laid schemes. This division within the Harlequins, the very faction responsible for guarding the Black Library, introduces a new element of uncertainty into the library's future. If the Harlequins themselves are divided about the proper use of the knowledge they guard, who decides what happens next? These questions bring us back to the fundamental nature of the Black Library as a place of choices. As the library contains the knowledge necessary to make informed decisions about the future, but the knowledge itself does not dictate what those decisions should be. It provides options, not answers. It offers understanding, not certainty. The choices that will determine the fate of the Aeldari, the fate of the Imperium, the fate of the entire galaxy, must be made by the individuals who have the courage and the wisdom to walk through the library's doors and engage with the terrible and wonderful knowledge that waits within. And that is, perhaps, the most profound lesson the Black Library has to offer. Knowledge is not enough. Understanding is not enough. Even the most comprehensive library in the galaxy, containing every secret and every answer and every piece of wisdom that millions of years of civilization have produced, it cannot save you if you lack the courage to act on what you learn. The Black Library is a tool, the most powerful tool in the galaxy, but like all tools, its value depends entirely on the hands that wield it and the purposes to which it is put. The Harlequins understood this when they accepted the responsibility of guarding the library. The knowledge they protect is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end, a resource to be deployed in the service of the galaxy's survival. And the most important moment in the library's history, the moment that will determine whether all of Segorak's scheming and all of the Harlequin's sacrifice has been worthwhile, is the moment when someone walks through its doors with the wisdom to use what they find and the courage to act on what they learn. That moment may come during the Rana Dandra, or it may come during some other crisis that has not yet been imagined. It may come quietly in the depths of the webway, with no audience and no fanfare, a single being making a single choice based on knowledge that was preserved for exactly this purpose. Whenever it comes, the Black Library will be ready. Its corridors will shift to reveal what needs to be revealed. Its consciousness will guide the worthy to the knowledge they need. And the Laughing God, watching from the shadows as he always has, will finally deliver the punchline to the greatest jest in the history of the universe. Among the many Harlequin masks that serve as the Black Library's protectors, the Mask of the Veiled Path deserves particular attention, because their methods illuminate a side of the library's operations that we have not yet fully explored. The Veiled Path are manipulators. Where other masks protect the library through direct combat or through maintaining the webway's physical integrity, the Veiled Path operates in the shadows, manipulating the events of the wider galaxy to ensure that threats to the library never materialize in the first place. The Veiled Path has been known to infiltrate the courts of imperial governors, to plant agents among the retinues of inquisitors, to whisper suggestions into the ears of military commanders whose decisions might inadvertently bring hostile forces too close to the webway's hidden corridors. They are the silent gardeners of the galaxy's political landscape, pruning here and planting there, shaping the course of events with a subtlety that makes their influence almost impossible to detect. This is manipulation on a cosmic scale, and it raises uncomfortable questions about the extent to which the Black Library's guardians are willing to go to protect their charge. The Veiled Path does not limit itself to combating obvious threats. They manipulate events proactively, redirecting the course of wars and the fates of entire civilizations to ensure that the library remains hidden and secure. Worlds have burned, and populations have been displaced because the veiled path determined that the strategic situation required it. Lives have been sacrificed on the altar of the library's security, not through malice, but through the cold calculus of necessity. Is this justified? The Harlequins would say yes, that the library's preservation is worth any price, because the knowledge it contains may one day be the only thing standing between the galaxy and total annihilation. As critics might argue that no repository of knowledge, however valuable, justifies the kind of large-scale manipulation and collateral damage that the Veiled Path's operations entail, the answer, like so many things in Warhammer 40,000, depends on your perspective and on how much faith you place in the idea that the ends can justify the means. What the Veiled Path's activities do make clear is that the Black Library is not a passive institution. It does not simply sit in the webway and wait for seekers to come to it. Through its Harlequin guardians, the library actively shapes the galaxy around it, nudging events in directions that serve its interests and the interests of the knowledge it contains. The library is not merely a repository. It is an actor, a participant in the grand drama of the galaxy's history, a force that influences events even as it records them. This active role becomes even more significant in the era of the Great Rift, the massive warp storm that tore the galaxy in half, following the fall of Cadia and the completion of Abaddon, the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. The Great Rift, also known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, has fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the galaxy. Warp travel and astropathic communication have become far more dangerous and unreliable. Entire sectors have been cut off from the wider Imperium. The forces of chaos have gained a permanent corridor of influence that stretches across the galaxy's breadth. For the Webway, the Great Rift represents both a crisis and an opportunity. The rift's destabilizing effect on the boundary between real space and the warp has caused additional damage to the Webway's already compromised structure, opening new breaches and weakening existing seals. The Harlequins have been forced to divert resources to maintaining the Webway's integrity, stretching their already thin numbers even further. But the rift has also increased the Webway's strategic importance enormously. With conventional warp travel becoming increasingly dangerous, the Webway represents one of the few reliable means of traversing the galaxy. The Aeldari's ability to travel through the Webway, while other species are left struggling with the rift's disruption, gives them a significant strategic advantage, one that they are keenly aware of and that they guard jealously. For the Black Library specifically, yet the era of the Great Rift is a time of heightened danger and heightened relevance. The knowledge contained within the library is more important than ever because the forces of chaos are more powerful than they have been in 10,000 years. The library's records of chaos tactics, chaos vulnerabilities, and chaos weaknesses could prove decisive in the battles that will determine whether the galaxy survives the current crisis or falls to the darkness that presses in from all sides. And yet the library remains hidden, its knowledge locked away behind the same barriers that have protected it for millennia. The Harlequins continue to guard their charge with the same dedication and the same secrecy that they have always maintained. And Segarak, the Laughing God, continues to play his long game, in arranging his pieces on the cosmic board with the patience and the precision that only a god can muster. The story of the Black Library is far from over. In many ways, it is only just beginning. The events of the current era, the Great Rift, the rise of the Inari, the awakening of the Necrons, the resurgence of chaos, all of these developments are converging toward a moment of crisis that may determine the fate of the galaxy for millennia to come. And when that moment arrives, the knowledge contained within the Black Library may be the difference between survival and annihilation, between hope and despair, between a future worth living and the eternal darkness of a galaxy consumed by chaos. That is the promise and the burden of the Black Library. That is the weight that the Harlequins carry on their shoulders every day, every hour, every moment of their existence. And that is why, in the grim darkness of the far future, in a galaxy where there is only war, the Black Library stands as one of the most important, most mysterious, and most endlessly fascinating elements of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. There is another figure who deserves mention in our exploration of the Black Library, a figure whose story intersects with the library in a way that illuminates the complex relationship between faith, knowledge, and the war against chaos. Her name is Ephrael Stern, and she is one of the most remarkable humans to have been associated with the Black Library in any capacity. Stern is a sister of battle, a warrior nun of the Adepta Sororitas, the militant arm of the ecclesiarchy. She is, in many ways, the opposite of what you might expect from a person connected to the Black Library. Where Chevak was a scholar and an intellectual, Stern is a soldier and a zealot. Where Draco operated as a rogue agent, pursuing his own agenda outside the bounds of imperial authority, Stern is a devout servant of the Emperor, her faith as much a part of her identity as her armor and her weapons. But Stern is no ordinary sister of battle. Through circumstances that are extraordinary even by the standards of Warhammer 40,000, she became fused with an anti-demonic power of tremendous potency. The specifics of how this occurred are complex and involve encounters with both demonic entities and the mysterious forces that oppose them. But the result was a being of unique nature, a human woman infused with a power specifically designed to combat the forces of chaos, a living weapon against the ruinous powers, whose very presence is toxic to demonic entities. This unique nature brought Stern to the attention of the Harlequins, and through them, to the attention of the Black Library's guardians, where most humans would be turned away from the library's gates, unable to meet the exacting standards of psychic purity and self-mastery that the library's consciousness demands. Stern's anti-demonic nature gave her a different kind of qualification. She had not merely mastered the chaos within herself. She had become, in a very real sense, an embodiment of the principle that opposes chaos, a walking manifestation of the power that the Black Library exists to serve. Stern's connection to the Black Library suggests something profound about the relationship between faith and knowledge in the war against chaos. The Imperium, with its rigid orthodoxy and its prohibition against studying the very enemy it fights, represents one extreme in the spectrum of approaches to combating the ruinous powers. The Black Library, with its comprehensive and dispassionate accumulation of knowledge about chaos, represents the other extreme. Stern, as a being who bridges both worlds, who carries the fire of imperial faith and the blessing of powers associated with the library's mission, represents a potential synthesis of these two approaches. She suggests that faith and knowledge are not mutually exclusive, that the warrior's conviction and the scholar's understanding can coexist within a single being and produce something greater than either could achieve alone. This is a theme that runs through the entire story of the Black Library, the tension between knowledge and faith, between understanding and belief, between the desire to know and the fear that knowledge itself might be corrupting. The Imperium fears knowledge of chaos because it believes that such knowledge is inherently corrupting, that the mere act of studying the ruinous powers opens a door through which corruption can enter. The Black Library's very existence is a rebuke to this belief, a monument to the conviction that knowledge of the enemy is essential to defeating the enemy, and that the risk of corruption can be managed through discipline, wisdom, and the strength of character to resist temptation. Neither approach is entirely right, and neither is entirely wrong. The Imperium's fear of forbidden knowledge is not without foundation. History is filled with examples of individuals who set out to study chaos with the best of intentions and ended up being consumed by it. The very nature of the warp makes it dangerous to study, because the warp responds to the thoughts and emotions of those who interact with it. To study chaos is to attract its attention, and to attract the attention of the dark gods is to invite their corruption. But the Black Library's approach is not without its own risks. By accumulating so much dangerous knowledge in one place, The library has created a target of immense value for the forces of chaos. If the library were ever to fall, if its contents were ever to be claimed by the servants of the dark gods, the consequences would be catastrophic on a scale that defies imagination. The very comprehensiveness that makes the library so valuable as a weapon against chaos also makes it the single most dangerous prize that chaos could hope to claim. The balance between these risks is the central challenge of the Black Library's existence. The library must be comprehensive enough to be useful, but not so accessible that it becomes a vector for corruption. It must be hidden enough to be secure, but not so isolated that its knowledge cannot be applied when it is needed. It must be open enough to allow worthy individuals to benefit from its contents, but not so open that unworthy individuals can exploit its resources. But maintaining this balance is the task that the Black Council and the Harlequins have carried out for 10,000 years, and the difficulty of that task cannot be overstated. Now let us consider another dimension of the Black Library's significance, one that is often overlooked in discussions of its role in the war against chaos. The library is not merely important because of what it contains, it is important because of what it represents about the nature of civilization itself. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, civilization is constantly under threat, not just from external enemies, though there are plenty of those, but from the slow, grinding erosion of knowledge and culture that accompanies perpetual warfare. The Imperium of man is, in many ways, a civilization in decline. But the technology of the dark age of technology has been largely lost. The scientific method has been replaced by superstition and ritual. The accumulated knowledge of thousands of years of human development has been fragmented, corrupted, or deliberately destroyed by the very institutions that claim to protect it. The Aeldari have experienced this decline even more acutely. Their civilization, which was once the most advanced in the galaxy, was catastrophically diminished by the fall. The knowledge that survived the fall has been slowly eroding ever since, as craft worlds are destroyed, as Aeldari are killed in the endless wars that plague the galaxy, and as the simple passage of time takes its toll on records and memories and traditions that were once vibrant and alive. In this context, the Black Library stands as a beacon of resistance against the forces of entropy and forgetting. It is a place where knowledge is actively preserved, where the accumulated wisdom of millions of years is maintained and protected and kept alive. In a galaxy where so much has been lost, where entire civilizations have been ground to dust and their knowledge scattered to the winds, the Black Library represents the conviction that knowledge has value, that understanding is worth preserving, and that the effort to maintain a comprehensive record of what has been learned about the most dangerous force in the universe is worthwhile, even if that effort requires the dedication of an entire faction, of an entire species, for thousands of years. This is a profoundly hopeful message in a setting that is defined by its darkness and despair. Just the Black Library says that knowledge matters, that the past matters, that the lessons learned by those who came before us have value, even if those lessons were learned through terrible suffering and unimaginable loss. It says that the effort to understand the universe, to record that understanding, and to pass it on to future generations is one of the most important things that any civilization can do. And it says that this effort is worth protecting, worth dying for, worth dedicating your entire existence to, as the Harlequins and the White Seers and the members of the Black Council have done. Because if the knowledge is lost, if the library falls, if the accumulated wisdom of millions of years is consumed by the darkness that it was created to study and contain, then the galaxy will be a poorer, more dangerous, more hopeless place. And the forces that feed on hopelessness, that grow stronger as understanding fades and fear takes its place, will be that much closer to their ultimate victory. Let us also consider the threat that the Necrons pose to the Webway and, by extension, to the Black Library. We have mentioned the Dolmen Gates, the crude breaches that the Necrons used to enter the Webway during the War in Heaven. But the implications of this technology in the current era deserve further exploration. The Necrons are awakening. Across the galaxy, tomb worlds that have lain dormant for millions of years are stirring to life, their occupants emerging from their long sleep to reclaim the galaxy that they once ruled. And among the technologies that the Necrons possess, among the weapons and tools and devices that they bring with them from their ancient slumber, it is the knowledge of how to breach the webway's walls. The dolmen gates are not elegant. They are not the carefully constructed portals that the old ones built, or the refined access points that the Aeldari have maintained. They are blunt instruments, forcible breaches in the webway's structure that allow the Necrons to enter the labyrinthine dimension, but that also cause significant damage to the tunnels they penetrate. The webway itself seems to detect these breaches and attempts to seal them, but the Necrons' technology is advanced enough to maintain the openings for as long as they need them. For the Aeldari, the reawakening of the Necrons represents a threat on multiple levels. On the physical level, the Necrons are formidable enemies. Then they're deathless warriors, and their reality-warping technologies, making them among the most dangerous foes in the galaxy. But on the strategic level, the Necrons' ability to breach the webway threatens the entire infrastructure that the Aeldari depend on for transportation, communication, and the protection of their most precious assets, including the Black Library. If the Necrons were to breach the webway in sufficient force, if they were to gain access to the tunnels and corridors that surround the Black Library, the consequences could be severe. The library's defenses are designed primarily to repel psychic threats, to bar the entry of those corrupted by chaos, and to resist the forces of the warp. The Necrons are none of these things. They are soulless beings of living metal, utterly devoid of psychic energy, completely immune to the lure of chaos. The library's fundamental defense, the requirement that entrants have mastered the chaos within themselves, is meaningless against beings that have no connection to chaos whatsoever. This does not mean that the library would be defenseless against a Necron incursion. The Harlequins are formidable warriors who would fight with everything they have to repel any attacker, regardless of species. The library's physical defenses, its shifting corridors and its hidden entrances and its vast and labyrinthine structure would pose significant obstacles to any invading force. And the webway itself, with its confusing geometry and its hidden dangers, would make any large-scale Necron operation within its corridors extremely difficult. But the possibility exists. And it is a possibility that the library's guardians must consider as the Necrons continue to awaken across the galaxy. The ancient war between the Aeldari and the Necrons, a conflict that predates the fall by millions of years, may yet produce new battles fought in the corridors of the webway, with the Black Library as one of the ultimate prizes. The Harlequin Mask of the Dreaming Shadow is known to focus primarily on fighting Necrons, recognizing the unique threat they pose to the webway and to the Aeldari's continued use of the labyrinth dimension. These Harlequins spend much of their time patrolling the areas of the webway that are most vulnerable to Necron incursion, watching for signs of dolmen gate activation and responding to breaches before they can expand to threatening proportions. Their vigil is one of the many ongoing struggles that the Aeldari face in their effort to maintain the webway's integrity and protect the treasures it contains. There is also the matter of the entity known as Ephrael Stern and the Sister of Battle's unique significance in the greater cosmic drama playing out around the Black Library. Stern represents something unprecedented in the context of Aeldari-human relations. She is a bridge between two civilizations that have historically been suspicious of one another, a being whose nature speaks to the possibility of cooperation in the face of threats that neither species can defeat alone. The Harlequins recognize something in Stern that they have found in very few beings of any species, a genuine, uncorrupted alignment with the forces that oppose chaos. Not the rigid, a fearful opposition of the imperial ecclesiarchy, which fights chaos through denial and suppression. Not the cold, analytical opposition of the Aeldari farseers, who fight chaos through foresight and manipulation. Something different, something that combined the best aspects of both approaches and transcended the limitations of either. Stern's story suggests that the Black Library's mission may eventually require the cooperation of beings from across the galaxy, not just Eldari, but humans, and perhaps others as well. The forces of chaos are a threat to all living things, regardless of species or allegiance. If Tegarak's ultimate jest is to succeed, if the Rana Dandra is to be averted or its outcome changed, it may require a coalition of the willing that spans the divisions between species and factions, the Black Library, and as the repository of the knowledge that makes such cooperation possible, would be at the center of any such effort. This is perhaps the most hopeful interpretation of the library's role in the galaxy's future. Not merely as a vault for dangerous knowledge, not merely as a weapon to be wielded against the enemies of the Eldari, but as a gathering point for all those who understand that the war against chaos is a war that must be fought collectively or not at all. The library's requirement that entrants must have mastered the chaos within themselves is, in this light, not merely a security measure. It is a selection criterion, a way of identifying those individuals, regardless of species, who have the character and the strength of will to participate in the greatest struggle the galaxy has ever faced. As we draw closer to the end of our exploration, let us take a broader view and consider the Black Library's place within the grand narrative of Warhammer 40,000 as a whole. This is a setting defined by conflict, by the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between civilization and barbarism, between the light of understanding and the darkness of ignorance and superstition. Every faction, every species, every individual in the setting is engaged in this struggle in some form or another, whether they recognize it or not. The Black Library occupies a unique position within this grand narrative. It is one of the few things in the setting that is unambiguously devoted to the preservation and advancement of knowledge. The Imperium preserves some knowledge, but it also actively suppresses vast quantities of information that it deems heretical or dangerous. The Mechanicus pursues knowledge, but it does so within a framework of religious dogma that severely limits the scope and direction of their inquiry. The forces of chaos accumulate knowledge, but they do so for the purpose of corruption and destruction, twisting understanding into a weapon against the very concept of truth. Only the Black Library pursues knowledge for its own sake, for the belief that understanding the universe is inherently valuable, and that a comprehensive record of what has been learned about the most dangerous aspects of reality is essential for the survival of all living things. This makes the library a symbol of something larger than itself, a representation of the idea that even in the darkest of times, and even in a universe that seems determined to destroy everything of worth, the pursuit of understanding is still meaningful, still important, still worth the extraordinary effort and sacrifice required to maintain it. The Black Library also represents the idea that secrets can be kept for good reasons. In a galaxy where secrecy is often associated with conspiracy and corruption, where hidden knowledge is usually hidden because someone is using it for nefarious purposes, the library stands as an example of secrecy in service of a noble cause. The library's contents are kept secret not because the library's guardians want to use them for their own benefit, but because the knowledge they contain is genuinely dangerous and could cause incalculable harm if it fell into the wrong hands. The secrecy of the library is a form of stewardship, a recognition that some knowledge is too powerful to be allowed to circulate freely and must be managed by those who understand its implications and can be trusted to use it responsibly. This is a nuanced message in a setting that often deals in absolutes. The Imperium's approach to forbidden knowledge is to ban it entirely, to declare that any interaction with the forces of chaos is heresy, and that any attempt to study the warp is a sin against the Emperor. The Black Library's approach is more sophisticated. Some knowledge of chaos is essential for fighting it, but that knowledge must be carefully controlled and shared only with those who have demonstrated the capacity to handle it without being corrupted. Neither approach is perfect. As the Imperium's absolute prohibition leaves it poorly equipped to fight an enemy it refuses to understand. The library's controlled access means that crucial knowledge sometimes fails to reach those who need it most, because the library's guardians have determined that the risk of sharing it outweighs the potential benefit. Both approaches have their failures, and both have their successes. The tension between them is one of the driving forces of the setting, a reflection of a real-world debate about the proper relationship between secrecy and safety, between knowledge and security, between the desire to understand and the fear of what understanding might bring. In the end, The Black Library is a story about the power of knowledge and the responsibility that comes with it. It is a story about beings who have dedicated their lives to preserving and protecting the most dangerous information in the galaxy, not because they enjoy the power that this information gives them, but because they understand that without it, the galaxy would be defenseless against the forces that threaten to consume it. It is a story about a trickster god whose greatest trick may be the salvation of his entire species, a plan so audacious and so complex that it has been unfolding for 10,000 years and may take 10,000 more to reach its conclusion. It is a story about sorcerers and inquisitors, about warriors and scholars, about beings of extraordinary power and extraordinary vulnerability, all of them drawn to the same hidden place by the same irresistible force, the desire to know. And it is a story about hope, and in a setting that is often described as hopeless, in a galaxy where there is only war and where the laughter of thirsting gods echoes through the void. The Black Library offers the possibility that knowledge can overcome ignorance, that understanding can defeat fear, and that the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of struggle can provide the tools necessary to build a better future. Whether that future will ever be realized, whether Segorak's ultimate jest will succeed, whether the Rana Dandra will be averted or merely transformed, these are questions that may not be answered for many more millennia. But the fact that the questions exist, the fact that there is a plan and a place, and a collection of knowledge that could make the answers possible, that is something worth holding on to. In the grim darkness of the far future, even the smallest spark of hope is precious beyond measure. And the Black Library, hidden in the depths of the webway, guarded by the children of the Laughing God, is one of the brightest sparks in the galaxy. As we come now to the very end of our journey, let me leave you with this thought. The Black Library teaches us that knowledge is a living thing. It grows and changes and evolves, just as the library itself grows and changes and evolves within its shifting corridors. Knowledge does not simply sit on a shelf, inert and unchanging. It responds to the needs of those who seek it, reveals new facets and new implications as the context in which it is understood changes, and generates new questions even as it answers old ones. The Black Library is not merely a collection of books. It is a conversation, ongoing and unending, between the accumulated experience of the past and the needs of the present. And that conversation is one that we are all a part of, even here, even now, even in the simple act of listening to stories about a fictional universe. Because the themes that the Black Library explores, the tension between knowledge and power, between secrecy and security, between understanding and fear, these are themes that resonate far beyond the borders of any fictional setting. They are the themes of our own world, our own time, our own struggle to make sense of the forces that shape our lives, and to use what we learn for the betterment of all. So the next time you find yourself wondering about the nature of knowledge, about the responsibilities that come with understanding, about the price that must be paid to preserve what has been learned, you remember the Black Library. Remember the Harlequins who guard it, the White Seers who tend it, the Laughing God who created it. Remember the Sorcerer who spent 10,000 years trying to reach it, and the Inquisitors who risked everything to walk its halls. Remember the Emperor who dreamed of building a bridge to the hidden dimension that contains it, and the consequences of that dream's failure. Remember that somewhere, in a place that cannot be found on any map, in a dimension that most beings cannot perceive, there is a library that contains every secret, every answer, every piece of understanding that the galaxy has ever produced about the most dangerous force in existence. And remember that the guardians of that library have chosen to preserve that knowledge not for themselves, not for their own power or their own benefit, but for all the beings who might one day need it in the struggle against the darkness. That is the legacy of the Black Library. That is its gift to the galaxy. And that, more than any single book or artifact or prophecy contained within its walls, is what makes it the most important place in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. Thank you so much for listening to this deep exploration of one of the greatest mysteries in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore. This has been a long journey through the hidden corridors of the Webway and the shifting halls of the Black Library, and I hope you have found it as fascinating and as rewarding as I have found it to tell. If this video has captured your imagination, if it has deepened your appreciation for the incredible depth and richness of the Warhammer 40,000 setting, then please take a moment to hit that like button. Every like helps this channel grow and tells me that these deep dives into the lore are what you want to hear more of. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, I would love to have you join us. We explore the vast and terrible and endlessly fascinating universe of Warhammer 40,000 in a relaxed, atmospheric style that is perfect for unwinding at the end of a long day, or for drifting off to sleep while your mind wanders through the corridors of a galaxy that is dark and dangerous and full of wonders. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Until next time, I wish you peace and rest, and the quiet satisfaction of knowledge well gained. The Webway stretches on forever, and there are always more stories waiting to be told. I will see you in the next one. Take care.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.